Warning, this podcast contains scenes of explicit nonsense and lore.
Previously on the Resident Evil podcast.
You definitely didn't see me come in. You didn't. I know you didn't. And they did.
And I don't think it was necessarily the moment itself. I think it was the weight of the legacy had hit me.
It just felt like putting on a pair of comfortable slippers.
Well, that explains it, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I saw him, I literally was like, I saw like Charlton Heston at the end of Planet of the Apes, you know, when you see the Statue of Liberty, like I can't believe they fucking did it.
This just felt, the same, but just even more polished. It felt like a big budget title.
I was fucking right!
The Resident Evil Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 112 of the Resident Evil Podcast, where we've buried all our secrets in an underground Ark, and in case of an emergency, a cloned Batman is just around the corner. I'm Nick, better known as Neptune. Let's see who's joining us today. He's a fan of both Albert and Arnold Wesker. It's the Batman.
Hello.
He may cost $120 million on the open market, but to us he's priceless. It's Stars Tyrant.
Thank you very much, and hello.
Now known to sing people to death, it's Romby.
Hello.
And now wondering whether his mansion has survived the explosion, it's George Trevor.
I am, and it has. Hello.
Coming up on the podcast today, we are going to be doing our big lore dive into Resident Evil Requiem. We did our review last podcast, but now we're going to take a big look at all those niggling plot points, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what works with the lore, what's been a retcon. It's been a huge discussion point in the fan community, so we're going to tackle this head on. We have the news to catch up on as well, because we didn't do that in the last podcast, and we've got another Requiem-themed Neptune's Biohazard quiz to end. So let's start with the news. First bit of news is, unsurprisingly, Resident Evil Requiem, specifically sales figures. Yes. I'm sure you've seen, because Capcom have been chirping from the trees very loudly, that Requiem has sold very well indeed. 5 million in the first week, making it the fastest-selling Resident Evil ever. It took Remake 4 9 months to get to the same target. A huge success for Capcom. I think it's up to 6 million now, if I remember correctly. It's been a monstrous hit. Why? Why do we think?
Well, I left this out the last one because I didn't really want to start this thing during our review, but it's a good place to say it now in response to that news, Nick. Maybe, just maybe, the fandom was hungry for something new instead of playing something we've already seen and understood before. And I know people that go, oh, it's fucking Stars Tyrant banging on about the whole remake thing again, but come on, the proof's in the pudding now. Best-selling game in however many years. Maybe they just realign their, thought process. I know, if you believe all the rumours, we've got 2 remakes coming up next, which just saddens me a little bit. But there is clear hunger for new stories, and I hope some part of these sales figures send a strong message to Capcom that maybe, just maybe, people want new stories instead of replaying something that they've seen before. And that's where I'll leave it.
It's like horror as well, and survival horror that is making a resurgence. Maybe with Bloober and the success, obviously minimal compared to this, proving that there is a market for survival horror, a much wider audience that are going to trust Capcom far more, than Bloober. And
yeah. I mean, ironically, this whole resurgence of survival horror was started with the Resident Evil 2 remake. So believe me, everybody, that irony is not lost on me. It was a nice entry point to pave the way for a lot of these horror remakes, and we talked about this during the reflected on the influences and everything like that podcast recently. But I just think, I just genuinely hope the message is very clear that there is a hunger for things. And I must say, the excitement and the theorizing and the speculation and everything on the Discords and everything like that was so interesting and exciting this time around, because we were genuinely going into a new mystery that we didn't know the answers to. We'd never seen this story before. And I do think the kind of rhetoric that surrounds that is so much more vastly interesting than the conversations that occur when you've got a remake title coming up next, because all that's kind of is just like, well, how are they going to interpret this event? Are they going to leave this out? Are they going to cut this? Are they going to add to this? Whereas when it's something new, like a lot of the people who are really into the lore, they can start theorizing, and I don't think anybody had any idea which way Requiem was going to go. I mean, it's some big swings in that game, which we're going to talk about a lot today. But I don't know. I don't want to speak for anybody, but I know personally, from my point of view, I would much rather have this than just a story I've played before. Even if not everything works in Requiem, I would still take it. I'd still take something new.
Well done, Sean, for not using the P word.
Which P word?
Product.
I'm going to carry that to my grave, aren't I?
Yeah, it's going to be on your grave. The man who said Resident Evil was product. Honestly, I think it's a factor of a whole bunch of things, and nothing that you or GT have already said that I wouldn't disagree with. But I think there's other factors, just like the hype around this game, the build of like the franchise over the last several titles, the fact again this game captured the zeitgeist. So Capcom's gotten into a really good habit of like finding things that capture outside of just the fandom, that managed to engage people. It's visually a very striking game, and the promotion did this. They didn't spoil a lot of the content in the promotion this time, which I think added more to that mystery and intrigue that people were kind of theorizing about. And just the general hype, like the gameplay, number of players online has really borne fruit. It was 5 million in 5 days, 6 million in less than, it seems, 2 weeks, I'm guessing. So it'll be interesting to see the quarter financials, because we're almost at the end of the quarter, at the end of March, which is the end of the financial year as well. See where it got in that amount of time. But other than Monster Hunter, this is the biggest Capcom game, like number of sales ever. And it's obviously clearly the fastest selling Resident Evil title. So yeah. I mean, you could add a bunch of other like crazy theories in regards to like how that game was marketed. And I mean, I know we've all talked about it and other people have talked about it, how once Leon was introduced, there was almost this feeling of like, oh God, Resident Evil 6 again. But obviously the proof was also in the pudding, that once people actually started to play it, they were like telling other people, oh my God, this is as good as I thought it was going to be. Like, I was hoping this was not going to be a repeat, and it's not. And I think word of mouth has helped as well. Obviously reviews have been solid. They haven't been like the best of the franchise, but they were still more than decent. And it's been reflected in the user scores, because if you look at the user scores, the Metacritic one, like Resident Evil Requiem is currently number 2 of all time, behind just one game. Like, that's crazy. I personally don't think it's as good as that, but obviously that's my take. But I'm very much impressed by that. But obviously that will just add sales links, and everything that Capcom's put out since Resident Evil 7 on the RE engine tends to have legs, because that game kind of undersold at launch. It sold okay, it did 3.5 million, but it was soft compared to what they were hoping, and it wasn't until it eventually continued to sell with legs that they realized there was something going on, which was part of the reason why they pivoted to looking at other gameplay designs at the time. And then all the remakes have also done very well. So I don't doubt Requiem will continue to sell well and continue to sell. And this won't just be a record opener, but it'll continue to have very, very long legs and catch up to all the other games quite quickly. So yeah, very impressive indeed.
I'm going to be intrigued to see how well it does ultimately on something like the Switch 2, because I know the physical edition, I use the word physical, you know what I mean. The physical edition of Switch 2 has been selling out quite well. Alex, I think, reported recently that sold out where he was.
Yeah, we were talking on for the last episode of Complete Global Saturation, and we were talking about the fact that like it sold out on Switch and where he was in Japan. The PS5 sold out at a lot of places too. Xbox, not really too much of a problem. Here, it was like, I can only speak anecdotally to locally, but it sold out. They're still awaiting restocks of physical, and copies are going on a reseller's market for like almost 50% markup in some cases, because people are still wanting those physical copies, and they were so short stocked. Like, we sold out pre-order copies, lenticular, steelbook, all that sort of stuff, almost 3 months before the game came out. And there's all those people that obviously pre-ordered the steelbook on Amazon. Some still don't have their orders, and there's no guarantee they'll ever get them. They're still sitting in there waiting, because it hasn't been cancelled, but it just never turned up. So
I actually saw it in the UK, I think it was in the first week, when Requiem was number 1, the Switch version, the Generation Pack that came out, It's actually really good value, really, if you haven't got it at 7, 8, and 9, and you get Requiem.
Well, they hadn't come out on the Switch before, so if your Switch players never played any of these games, it's a great deal.
But that made the top 10 in the UK as well, a compilation like that. So I feel the Switch 2 is a very good market. Potentially good market for Capcom really to exploit in the future, but we'll see.
I'll just caveat before someone goes, but there was the versions on the Switch one, but they're like not good versions, nor they actually the cloud versions. So before someone jumps out, but there was versions before, it's not quite the same. These are very much native, actual playable Switch ports, and they're very differently handled. So.
Well, keep an eye on Requiem sales targets, because I'm sure they're going to continue to go up and up if previous games are anything to go by. Next bit of news, Resident Evil 2 arcade news. Deadshot, shot, as it was called. Testing
no longer.
Japan. No longer, so Deadshot's a much better name. The Resident Evil 2 Arcade is coming out in Europe and Japan this year. I don't think any date has been set. No North America date yet, but it is currently being tested in Japan. And Alex has been posting on Twitter. He's played it, I think. I think he's queued up to play it. I didn't read if he enjoyed it or not, but it looked okay. It was tested in Europe earlier, I think last year, and I have since gone to a number of seaside resorts, but alas, it is not in yet. Sean, you were at the beach today. Any luck?
Alas, no, and I did look, even though I almost knew it wasn't going to be, but I did have a look around.
I love how you made it sound like he's loitering, just waiting for it to turn up.
Yeah, it's the benefits of being near the coast. We've got the opportunity to see if there's any updates in the arcade world. Did anyone think they might release it on home consoles at some point?
No.
Yeah, titled Gun Survivor 5. Be incredible.
It would, wouldn't it?
It would be, but I can't imagine. There's too many of these games now that are like these offshoots where people have invested in engines and they turn them into. There's a Tomb Raider one that's based off the
good.
Yeah, it's actually a good game, but like it's based off the rebooted era or whatever it is. I can't see them even reporting that. And like there's a bunch of these games where they're just like able to reuse assets or styles of existing things. So they're obviously using the RE Engine character models and all that sort of stuff for it. So to be fair, I mean that's no different than Gun Survivor 2, but arcade ports are fewer and far between these days, I think.
Final bit of news, survival unit news. Yes. Latest updates from the world of survival unit. Jack Krauser, Ashley, and Louis Serra are all coming to survival unit as new characters that you can unlock if you are that way inclined. Batman, I think only us are playing still.
Yep.
Are you excited?
Like in the whole world, just you two. Literally it.
I wish that was true, GT, with the amount of people I've seen still spending stupid amounts of money on it.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. No, I'm not particularly excited. I still haven't got Billy, Cohen, or Rebecca yet.
No,
I don't think I can get Rebecca because I'm refusing to pay a penny on this game. I've got Chris, but there is absolutely no way I can power him up to full potential because it would cost me about 700 quid.
Do what, though? Is that just to go on the exploration missions?
And attack other people and, loads of other pointless things. I mean, some people are well into that, but it's not my thing. I just want the Resident Evil side of it, and unfortunately, Survival Unit has got very little of it.
Well, let's see how long it's got left for the game. I'm surprised it's still going.
This is going to turn into the Mahara desire of every episode for a while, I think. Is a survival unit still going? Yes, it is. All right, moving on. Like, honestly, every episode's going to be an update on what's latest in it until it eventually dies.
Just one more thing as well. It feels only fitting we have to note this milestone, but today, as of the point of recording, is the 21st of March, which means in a few mere hours, in fact it already is for Rob, the 30th anniversary of Resident Evil.
Woo!
Yep.
We finally made it.
That's nice, because that moves us nicely into site news. We can talk a little bit about that.
We're all feeling old. Let's move on.
Yeah. We do plan to cover the 30th anniversary, which we'll reveal a little bit more in the coming future, but there will be a special podcast or podcasts on perhaps looking at some of the earlier games to celebrate their legacy. as we hit this important milestone, and fingers still crossed for some type of master collection. Keep your eyes out and ears out for future updates for us celebrating 30 years of Resident Evil. Big shout out as well to our new patron, Nathan. Thank you very much for joining REP. If anyone's interested, of course, you can head over to our website and click on the community tab, and there's a little Patreon link there if you wish to join us. We do have a little bit of other site news. The encyclopedia on the website very slowly being updated. We're going to be adding all the Requiem articles in due course. I think Chunk's up there, Nathan Dempsey's up there so far, but we're going to be doing more and more. There may be a bit of a pause because there is story DLC's been announced. I suppose that's other bit of news we haven't really covered, that Capcom have announced story DLC. Not a surprise. That will come up in our main discussion. And I suppose the final bit of site-ish news is, John, you've been interviewed for IGN. And by the time this podcast comes out, with any luck, the IGN interview will be out.
Yeah.
In terms of your timeline?
Yeah, I think it was because of that they got in touch, but they just wanted some general thoughts on Requiem, really. So I've just answered, I think it was half a dozen questions, and I think they're going to put it out early next week sometime.
So keep your ears like that. Please share, like, and subscribe to that. That would be very handy to spread the word of REP. That does finish all the news. We now turn our attention to the main lore discussion of Resident Evil Requiem.
Shutting yourself away in a dark room like this is quite the change for you, after the life you've led.
Life takes unexpected turns, don't you think?
Looking back, do you feel that the choices you've made have contributed to your present circumstances?
Of course. What you sow, you reap. Isn't that the natural order?
So, tell me, Lord Spencer, what would you like the world to know?
The truth.
What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
My research opened Pandora's box, unleashing disaster upon the world.
Except Elpus, the goddess of hope? Or so the myth goes.
A blind hope.
What do you mean?
Humans cannot predict when death will come for them. This is why they have hope. I was wrong, and I am plagued by guilt. Happiness cannot be achieved at the expense of others. I think that's enough for today.
Why did you accept my request for an interview? Who is that? Is that one of your subjects?
Of course not. She was alone in the world. I took her in to make amends.
Is she
perfectly normal? Just an average child needing a home. She is my hope. Aren't you beautiful? Would you like to hold her?
Okay. She's adorable. What's her name?
Grace.
Grace. Is there anything else you'd like to tell me?
I've said my piece. I only hope it serves as a requiem for those who have passed.
So welcome everyone. We are now going to be looking at Resident Evil Requiem's lore in as much detail as humanly possible. There's lots to chat, but I wanted to start with this kind of opening monologue, should we say. I was thinking when I was preparing for the podcast, that when I was casting my mind back to our non-spoiler review of Resident Evil Village, I proclaim that the game will have many talking points that will be discussed for years and years in the community going forward. I still stand by that to an extent, but when I consider that comment in light of Resident Evil Requiem, I feel my stance has somewhat changed and needs tweaking. And I think that this main point surrounding Requiem and the clear distinction that can be drawn from Village. Whilst Village did indeed have many talking points, with a big retcon and plot change with Ethan's death, the power and the nature of the mold, and even Miranda meeting Spencer, all of this, even with that Spencer umbrella tidbit, was all extremely self-contained within the kind of mold verse, if you want to call it that. If you were not invested in that particular story, then the Village's lore legacy, outside of talking about why Spencer did not seek out the mold for immortality, was actually quite weak to the overall narrative and plot points of Resident Evil. Compare that to Requiem, which in some ways pulled a similar sort of trick with big historical lore changes, Spencer being dragged into a modern day narrative once again, but this time tying it up with the ongoing bioterrorism angle with the connections, using Wesker, bringing back zombies. I think I can confidently say there has been more detailed discussions about Requiem's legacy and lore in the first month or so than the entirety of Village ever did. And I think this is a point, Sean, you very much made in our review, just about there seemingly wanting to be that pull towards legacy characters. And I think I can say, with, as I said, with some confidence that extends to legacy viruses or legacy locations and things like that, making Village and the Ethan Moldverse seem a little bit more self-contained.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the series was clearly in a bit of a rut after Resident Evil 6, which tried to do a sort of jack of all trades, master of none collection of all the, big bits of the series, if you like, all the characters and, all the viruses in there. And I don't, again, want to speak for everybody, but I did feel that most of us found Resident Evil 7, even if it wasn't necessarily a cup of tea, like the reset was appreciated to try and get away from the sort of bonkersness of Resident Evil 6. It grounded the series again in a really good way. And I will always forever appreciate that. And for a time, I did feel like I was happy to move in that direction and leave the old story in the past. And I've, always been saying on the podcast for the last few years, just want those fresh approaches to this universe and things like that. But then when Requiem came out, and we have Leon, and we have Sherry, and we have a return to Raccoon, I realised I'd been missing it. I'd been missing those connective details to the legacy and the lore, and I didn't realise how much I had missed it until this game, and I don't know whether I'm ready for it to go away again, because the problem is like Elpis and its release potentially gives the series another reset point, and I genuinely don't know where we'll go from here. So again, there's a grand irony to it all, isn't there? That we've kind of gone back to that legacy stuff, and we've referenced Spencer, and we've got, new files that expand the lore. We've got a new facility that we never knew about, sort of retconned in. But at the same time, it's almost going to abandon it all over again. So, it's going to be interesting. But yeah, I did very much appreciate going back in a way that wasn't like bollocks forced umbrella logos in a Romanian village that amounted to nothing, you know what I mean? Or a Spencer lore drop, which means nothing. In fact, if anything, gives us a bigger plot hole for his, dying predicament in RE5. This felt satisfying in a way, and not so much in others, but we're gonna break it all down as best we can.
And no lore room, I've realised, in Requiem.
You just had a lore facility.
We had a lore facility.
A lore facility, and then they surprisingly were very restrained when you come across Spencer's office, and there's nothing.
So
there's
this
nothing.
game actually does give you a lore room, like could be the biggest lore room in the entire series, and there's not one fucking file in there, and I feel like Capcom have had our pants down, haven't they?
You can look at the wheelchair, and that's it. That's all you can do in there.
You go in there and you start rubbing your hands, thinking, "Here we fucking go, boys and girls. There's going to be some big lore in here." And you're going around, literally, almost lifting up the rug, going, "Where's the files? Where are they?"
Wasn't there a painting of Miranda in it?
Yeah, and there's pictures in there, but it's all to read in visual detail, and then the only thing you can actually click on is the wheelchair. To me, that ironically, it speaks louder about the fact that one of the things that I continue to find very frustrating, which is that Capcom will not commit too much either. They've gotten very after 6, and they blame 6 a lot for this as well. It's like they don't want to pigeonhole themselves into anything, so they don't put too much detail in where it's not necessary. And so they're like, well, if we put a bunch of stuff in Spencer's office, it may mean we're beholden to this for future and we'll put ourselves into a corner. So we'd rather just not have that, and we'll leave it with just the plot points that we've got, and then we can recraft it and expand on that as we see fit in future titles, as opposed to like writing stuff, because otherwise they end up in a Seashell S HCF Tricell Blue Umbrella
Neo Umbrella.
Neo Umbrella, yeah. See, look, all these things that I'm forgetting, and then you have to figure out how to make these work. So now let's be more clear on what we're going to do, and then when we don't need to, don't put anything in, because otherwise we're in the situation again. And I feel like that's a thing I've started to see over the last few games, but particularly Requiem, where it only says or tells as much as it needs to, even if it is frustrating at times, but it is what it is.
I did like the Miranda picture, though. People have pointed out it did actually get changed in the day one patch or whatever it was.
Yes, I thought it had. We have lots to get through, ladies and gentlemen. The first area I think is of importance is Spencer's vision in this particular game, and specifically what the hell was he doing? This has certainly generated a lot of discussion in the community about redemption, and in fact I think our lore chat has been very animated, should we say, about whether people accept the idea of redemption and things like that. But we can break this down further. I suppose the first sub-bit is the new virus. We don't have a name for it yet, and I think in the files it's generally referred to as the mutated T-virus. The property seemingly being, and this has also raised a few points recently, can this be spread through biting, and exactly what does it do? Because the files refer to memories being retained within the blood. I thought they were going to bring back Spencer through his blood. I thought that was where the angle was potentially going. And then when Zeno turned up, I thought, oh God, they've done that. And we're not quite sure they've done either, to be brutally honest. But I like the new T-virus because it wasn't too over the top. There's a bit of explanation into, say, things like chunk. Batman, do you want to start on the mutated T-virus? What were the properties or capabilities that were particularly interesting from your point of view?
Well, I just like how it ties into the larger themes of the series, really. I mean, we don't know when this mutant T-virus was created, but I would suggest it was in the late 70s or very early 1980s, sometime after James Marcus was exiled. And I think Spencer was still motivated by his discussions with Miranda and the whole idea of transferring memory and the megamycete and all that, but obviously he wanted to use a virus. And his theory was all around the idea behind someone's memories might exist in biological factors in the blood. There's real-world theories of people in the early days of organ transplants suggested, well, is a part of the original donor being transferred to the new person? Is it going to affect their personality? That's a real-world thing. I mean, it's not proven, it's very unlikely, but it was taken seriously at one point. So I think Spencer was influenced by something like that. And with the T-virus, he believed you can manipulate those factors, and he wanted to preserve the minds of people with superior intellects or great leaders, which again links back to the Miranda and the mold storyline. So this virus wasn't just about creating stronger humans. He wanted to create, I think, a successor to himself, someone who would carry the same vision as him after he went, basically to imprint himself through a virus onto another. So whoever would take over from him would carry the same thought process as him, that, humanity needed to evolve beyond its current form. And I had a look at the Japanese files in regards to this mutated virus, and it goes into a little bit more detail. It says the mutated T-virus can on rare occasions trigger an abnormal reaction in the host's trigger enzymes. The blood contains many different kinds of cells. Among them are the cells connected to memory. Through the use of the T-virus, these blood factors can be controlled, and once exposed, the blood undergoes transformation. And this is where Spencer believed the key to memory inheritance was, and that's kind of the backbone of the whole story. He needed someone not just to adapt to a neutered version of progenitor, which ties into the larger story. He also wanted someone who could withstand the toxicity of this mutated T-virus, become infected with it, but preserve their own intelligence and essentially be able to hack into the minds of others. And it was all about finding a subject who could adapt to this virus. That's the backbone of the story. That's what leads to the clones, and obviously later on with Grace. I mean, we don't have a lot of information to go on, but I think it sits quite nicely along the other storylines you've got going. You've got, round about the same time, you'll have Alexia and the Ashfords working on T. Veronica. You've got James Marcus exiled at the training facility. Wesker and Birkin at Arkley Labs trying to make the T-virus as potent as possible. And Spencer was always in the background. We never really knew what he himself was doing, and I think Requiem's gave us the answer. He's very much focused on this mutant T-virus and exploring ways of gaining immortality by controlling memory and transferring it across.
Does that work with what we know in Resident Evil 5 and Project W?
Well, I don't see why not, because Spencer might have been looking at one of the Wesker children as the subject who could adapt to this virus, because the clone's children we see at the orphanage, they carry Wesker-like traits, if you want, with the red eyes and the regeneration properties. So it wouldn't surprise me if this new virus is in some way tied to the virus that Wesker injects himself with, because that's also described in Umbrella Chronicles as a mutant T-virus.
From the T-virus stocks, isn't it, or something like that? So it could be. Let's move a little bit onto the cloning, because John, you mentioned the cloning. I think I said in the last review that cloning has been actually quite sensitively approached in the series so far, with the Ashford project, Veronica project, and the Tyrants, the Sergei and things like this. This was actually a little bit more explicit and raised the potential retcon point of having seemingly very powerful cloned children running around in the early 90s. These are classified as Series 60 and Series 70 clones. You play as Chloe, and there's a couple of others. Rob, how did you feel with that?
It's one of those things that exactly as you said, like when you start going backwards and you start adding things that inherently... This is the difference where I listen to things sometimes and I'm like, people confuse what is the difference between a retcon and a recontextualization. Retcons imply that you've changed the continuity of something that doesn't match up without making that change. But recontextualizing something just means that you had something that doesn't change the core of it, you just expand it out. But this can also work in reverse. And so when you add something like, all of a sudden there's a bunch of cloned children in the late 80s and early 90s, what does that mean for the wider lore? What does that have is the impact for the wider scope of everything, the technology, the science? Does it feel earned? It's that same thing that happens when you find out, something existed decades before and you're like, well, hang on, that could change a lot of things coming afterwards. And then why did they make the decisions to go to this when this existed? You can draw the parallels, and this isn't a bad one. This isn't me going, this is a retcon that makes sense. It's that thing we talked about as well. It's like you've all of a sudden got Spencer looking at blood, DNA, memory, passing on information this way. And there's some parallels to the Revelations 2 thing of what Alex Wesker's doing. And that kind of lines up really nicely. But it could also easily, if it looks weird, you're like, if Spencer had been more successful, why wasn't Alex Wesker going down that path? And so that's where you get what essentially becomes recontextualization now becomes a retcon, because it makes something else later much more messy than it should be. So yeah, it's weird. I don't feel like anything it does specifically causes any problems, but there's always that potential because of exactly what you said. You just all of a sudden, you're adding huge numbers of clones into this series where it's been mostly deftly handled, shown to be very not always the best option and problematic. And yet this game not only has the clone children, but we also have Zeno turning up, and that's unexplained. So yeah, it leaves a lot of potential problems, I think. Nothing on the surface level currently, but it could be down the long run when you start putting all the other pieces together in future games.
I think the concern is that you've got a scenario with the Ashford, which is considered a cloning miracle.
This is where I'm like, if you added the thing that in the few years after that essentially Spencer was able to leverage that information, you'd be like, okay, those two things now line up, because it's a few years later and they've developed the technology based off what the Ashfords did. If it wasn't that, then it's just a coincidence that all of a sudden someone else is doing cloning. And so this is where I feel like sometimes playing it safe and sometimes looking for those obvious connections would work, because you could have had a literal thing where it's explained a little bit more about the cloning process, not in the specifics, but just being off the back of the Ashford developments, they've managed to tastefully take this information and use it to clone a perfect test subject for, this viral load and be able to be repeatable. It's pseudoscience, and I get all that, and I also expect that these files, as they always do, only explain a certain amount. But it's funny when you see other connections they've made or potential connections, and you go, yeah, there's some pretty obvious ones here, and there's a way to expand this where it actually makes a lot more sense. But right now, left unexplained and vague kind of makes it more risky because we don't know what this means to the overall picture than what's shown.
I must admit, it doesn't bother me particularly because cloning has always been in the series. Alexia was born in 1971, so she's the earliest example. And even she was imperfect because Alexander was trying to create, a new version of Veronica. He wasn't expecting twins to come along. Then you've got Sergei, who had 10 clones created as part of a classified Soviet army program, so that's not even related to Umbrella. And that happened in the late 80s. Because he joined Umbrella in 1991 when he donated those 10 clones. And of course, the BOWs, they're mass-produced, not via breeding, but through cloning. So it's always been there. So the cloning of these children, because it's not like there's hundreds of these kids running around, there's only like a dozen. It doesn't particularly bother me. Yeah, the technology probably wasn't there, if we're talking in real terms, in 1990, but,
this universe it was,
Yeah, this is Resident Evil at the end of the day.
As I said, to me, it's just that impact of what it means later and whether or not it'll continue to be okay or not, and that's it. That's my only concern. It just seems like a lot, considering, as you said, Nick, like how somewhat limited it had been up until this point. All of a sudden it's like, oh, there's the thing. But then when I hear stuff like, you think about the mass-produced bioweapons creations, it is a bit different.
Yeah, and I just wonder, why was Tyrant such a difficult problem then? You've got files and discussions points about why it's so hard to recreate or find the perfect host for a Tyrant, and, they managed to eventually find one, and it all seems a little bit, well, it took them a long time to find, a perfect
but that's the thing. That's the thing, isn't it? You need to find someone before you can clone him. You need to find the right person.
And even when we're looking at the children in this case for Requiem, because it was essentially, it had a purpose, but it ended up being, I was going to say it ends up being a false lead, but it's not. It's just kind of like left too vague to explain because the intent with the children has a purpose, and then eventually Spencer's not caring about that purpose anymore. And so it's kind of like it succeeded, but also we don't know what the measuring mark is because he went off to a different project. So
yes,
is it based off that? Or
that's
not?
A really good point, because it is a confusing part of the game, isn't it? I thought I was playing as Grace for some reason.
Until you realise the age of it and then what happens at the end. But it's not just that. It's like the purpose of the stuff with the clones was obviously something. Like it was one thing that he was looking into this blood memory thing. But then the Elpus thing is separate from that. But there's no way to say that those two things aren't connected. That's something that came to the eventuation of the creation of Elpus came from that research, or it's not. It's completely unrelated, and it's just not a red herring. Well, it is, because it's the same thing as Grace. When you find out that she is not as important as everyone thinks. So it's just there to continue to show that he was continuing to do experimentation, especially on children and all this sort of stuff, which just adds that creep factor, and is probably the same reason why John and I both, had the same viewpoint that, compared to some people, this whole redemption thing, I think it's just Spencer still being manipulative and all this, because it comes back down to that thing. He was still experimenting on children through the early 90s from the late 80s. He hasn't changed his tune, even if he's making Elpus. So just because he was doing this, what does that change about his character? And it doesn't redeem his or change his situation in Resident Evil 5 DLC as well. So it's weird. It's again, it's left so vague that it doesn't explain itself enough, but it hasn't contradicted itself yet, really. It's just waiting until either they fill in the gaps or they just don't.
I mean, the way I understood it was the clones were created to obviously improve this mutated T virus and try and find someone who could control and manipulate memory, because these clones were injected with Spencer's blood plasma as well. And on one of the computer monitors, it's difficult to see in game, but there's some text with the picture of Chloe from 1990 saying memory conformity was capped at 20%. So they had a little bit of success, but they couldn't seem to progress it further from there. And perhaps like the Tyrant project, it kind of stalled a bit because they couldn't make improvements. And then several years pass, and all of a sudden you're in the mid-1990s, and it's mentioned in Grace's report that Spencer was starting to lose his grip on Umbrella a little bit, and he was aware of, all these big rivals like Tricell and HCF and the family having an interest in Umbrella. So he started taking a step back, possibly stopped the cloning program, because we know at some point William Birkin took it over for the G-Virus clinical trials, and then focused on finalising Elpis, which I'm sure we'll get into, I think, was a failsafe to stop anyone getting hold of his toys. So that's how I understood the cloning thing. And when we get to Grace later on, because Spencer adopts her for whatever reason, and Victor Gideon is like, well, Spencer, given his history, there's no way he would just adopt this child out of the kindness of his heart. There's got to be something more going on, which is why he puts two and two together, thinks Grace is one of these clones for the T-Virus, and he's obviously wrong, or we think he's wrong.
I think there is confusion. In fact, most games since Resident Evil 2, there's always usually like a second virus of something creeping into a game, and here, I think the story's clever. I just wonder if it's trying to be a little bit too clever. As you said, you've kind of got this one storyline and Spencer's legacy of the mutated T-Virus as a thing. And then you've got the Elpus storyline. And as Rob says, they're not really connected in any way whatsoever. And that's where I think I certainly got confused playing the game, because you think there's a link. And unless Future Story DLC says otherwise, I don't think there is at all.
I was going to say, Nick, I think the whole point is that same red herring element of Grace, because at that point, narratively, they've done it, so they've constructed it so that you think there's a link to put importance on this connection to Grace and why she's the key, only for when the rug pull is revealed that she doesn't, for that to essentially prove that, there wasn't any connection here. That was just... It just coincidentally was happening at Ark, and also that's where he used to develop Elpus. I mean, as I said, there's no also explanation that they aren't linked, like that the research eventually didn't, something that was a byproduct of the research he was doing into the blood thing eventually led to this development, but that's also not that explicit. And so it's just left untold, and you just accept it as what it is. And I get it narratively, because as I said, it's all about like creating this idea about what Grace is for it all to be revealed that isn't the case. But it is, in the long run, means that these things don't seem to be connected, or not in any obvious way.
It's a little bit J.J. Abrams' mystery box, isn't it? So we'll chuck a few things, see how it is. I don't think it's told as well as it could be, but you could almost say you're almost playing it from the perspective of Victor Gideon as well. As a player, you're going, well, as you said, this must be important, and Victor must be spot on about this, and it's only at the very end you go, oh, okay, maybe not.
That's narratively driven on the fact that I agree with this comment too, because some people have made the comment. It's like when Victor's introduced in the early stages of the game, he seems very in control, very super, I don't say super intelligent, but super focused. He knows exactly what is going on. He feels like he's, in charge of everything. And then he slowly becomes more cartoonishly villainy, as the game goes on, not including the fact he's riding around on a little motorcycle firing rockets at you. But like by the end, it feels like in that last scene, he's so obsessed with Spencer, it's clouded his judgment, and he just kind of seems a little bit like so cartoony again by the end. It doesn't feel totally consistent with the character you meet in the first scene, where he's manipulated and set up Grace and turns up, and I joked about it with the flowchart that appears in the image at the end. Like it's this tonal whiplash a little bit with the character, that he both seems very intelligent and very, very organized to also not by the end, and it doesn't help the way that lands, I think, in some respects, when you actually go back and think about it.
I agree.
His obsession with Spencer. So
covert military units from every country on Earth come to Raccoon City for one purpose: to find Elpus.
What is Elpis?
The power to upset the military balance of the world. The last virus, created by Spencer. Designed to control human consciousness.
Mind control?
They couldn't let it be stolen, so they launched the missile strike to hide it.
To hide a virus? Why do something so extreme?
Extreme? Is it? When the president tried to investigate, they had him assassinated. And you are the key to retrieving Elpus.
Emily.
In a way. But not the girl you met. So many attempts. So many failures. Such a waste.
What do you mean?
Copies. Crafted to duplicate you. All useless. All scrapped. They each have their own sad story. They weren't able to recreate Spencer's key. But now we have the original. We have you. You can unlock Elpus at Ark. That's where we'll go.
So, what, I was made?
Correct.
Let's talk Elpis then. What is it? We've already kind of hinted that perhaps it's the ultimate failsafe. It's the idea that it would wipe out and eradicate any progenitor-based virus. It is a little frustrating that progenitor is not used as a term in the game. I don't think it appears once. And I think that would help enormously. The idea, to make it very clear that Elpis would remove any virus that is based on the progenitor out of the equation. I think that would be a good idea. But I like the idea that everyone thought it was something super powerful that everyone wanted.
Well, it was.
Yes,
just
but not for the reasons.
what they think it is. That's what I like about that more so than anything. It is super powerful. It's just the anti-god.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh dear God, fucking hell!
I think that's a good idea. I like that twist.
I think it ties back to what Rob was saying. Capcom are trying, even though they're trying to expand on the lore, they're also trying to simplify it, I think, for people. Everyone's familiar with the T-virus, but when you start adding references to more viruses like progenitor, even though it would make sense to a lot of people, it's still going to confuse a lot more.
Yeah. The only way around that is that you have a file that you make very obvious in a place that you have to pick it up that reads, explains like a little bit of... And I'm surprised they didn't, to be honest, because this would have been the perfect opportunity, would have been something about the history of Umbrella and like the virus history that would just remind everyone about the stuff in Africa and all that sort of stuff. But I also kind of get the feeling that Capcom tries to avoid expanding any reminders of Africa in Resident Evil 5 wherever possible these days. And just more from they don't like referring to the whole Africa racism thing at all. But it would have made sense if they'd had that, because at least it would have explained a little bit of like the various, because even like a file that explained about the various research that was going on, could you imagine like a thing that was a document that was from the 90s that did talk about like the leech research and the G virus research and all sort of stuff, would have totally fit within Requiem. But as John just said, like I think it just adds confusion, especially to someone who's either new or recent player. They just want the T virus, and this mutated T virus as a description is far enough, and going beyond that is adding too much for the exact reason as we both agree. It's maybe just trying to simplify things a bit.
I'm intrigued to know what Sean said at the beginning of the podcast when he was talking about Elpis being released. Are we back to a same sort of scenario whereby there is a soft reboot, a soft reset with regards to virology going forward with Resident Evil 10? I mean, obviously they could create anything they wanted to, but is this a similar scenario whereby all of the progenitor-based creations going forward are now completely null and void? There'll be no new C virus, there'll be no new T virus plus, there won't be a G virus beta or whatever, because Elpis is the be-all and end-all.
Well, possibly, but then possibly not, because we've kind of been here before with the end of Resident Evil 6 with Jake's blood. It's so powerful, it can nullify the C virus, it should work with other viruses. But you even get a file in that same game saying, well, viruses are very prone to mutation, the C virus has already started to mutate, we need to find Jake again and get more of his blood. So I'm sure if they want to go back to the T virus and whatnot, I'm sure they can come up with some sort of virus that's starting to show resistance to Elpis.
Or alternatively, someone's been, tinkering with it to try and get it to not be reacted with Elpis, and just say they're basically tinkering with the genetics of it to try and make it still work. Yeah. Which is, adds a potential new bad guy.
So I think there is a sense of closure. This is Capcom saying, right, we want them to move on from all this stuff now, but there's a back door back into it if needs be.
Mm. Who was around at this point? In terms of corporations, because Tricell certainly weren't around. They went bust after the events of Resident Evil 5.
Well, it depends when you're talking. If you're talking about when Spencer was developing Elpis, that was the 1980s and the 1990s, creating it in anticipation of him losing control of Umbrella, potentially losing control of the T-Virus to these other corporations, and he wanted a failsafe to stop his enemies from getting it.
Yeah, by the time the game is talking about, I mean, you've had the implication that the remains of Tricell had been bought up, essentially, or folded into another consortium, which, obviously now we know what that is, but it's like, it's just the fact that the branding still exists. I guess it's no different than you see, metal tins with petrol companies on them, all the time, and whether or not those petrol companies still exist or in that country or been rebranded. And sometimes you see old logos, like it's just owned by another company now. So, yeah.
Well, it does say Ark has been a bioweapons trafficking hub for decades, and I think Zeno says that different companies send representatives every single year to Ark, and Tricell have been there at some point prior to the events of Resident Evil 5, and likewise HCF, because we don't even know if they're still around anymore. That crate with their logo on could be 20 years old for all we know.
Yeah.
Still really don't like that. It's the lazy storytelling, especially considering that, as I said, that HCF crate is just the same crate you see everywhere in Raccoon, with just one single change of the HCF logo, which is not even really a logo, it's just text.
Yeah. As the game was progressing, I thought, they're going to make HCF part of the connections, but when I saw that logo and then later the references in Grace's report, it was like, maybe not then.
It's left, intentionally, unintentionally clear, I think, because they don't know what they want to do with that, whether or not they will fold that in, potentially, or not. And so I think they became very non-committal. That's how I read it. But again, that's the reason why I'm just like, I could have just done without the barrel and the box at that point in, Leon's usual suspects. I see the in-universe reason for having that because it's explained, but I still don't like it.
No.
Because it's just like, as you said, it's just lazy. You loved it, Nick, and I was just like, oh God, like, I was just like, oh my God, like, this is like the laziest. I mean, I'd rather a document that literally had like visitors from companies, blah, 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 visited the Ark would have been better than having some fucking barrels and boxes with a logo slapped on it.
By this point in the game, I was fully on the dark side about.
You're scratching at the walls and leafing at straws to be like, I recognize that. I know that.
Absolutely. There's lots of things I do like that. Like the idea of Ark was quite cool, and using it as a hub is really cool. I just don't know why all of this couldn't have just happened in Stoneville. I don't actually see the benefit why this needed to be back in Raccoon City. I don't know why we couldn't have just had the idea that Umbrella actually owns Stoneville or Rhodes Hill, the town, and they had developed everything else next to it. To me, I don't think actually having the setting of Raccoon City particularly aided the story, other than, the moments of going back into the RPD, which some people seemingly enjoyed, and having all that jazz. But I think from a storyline point of view, I'm not sure it added anything to it.
No, it didn't. You could argue logically that Ark could have been anywhere else on the planet and they still could have told the same story.
Yep.
And you've got to say, well, is the retcon with the city not being destroyed, etc., is it really worth it? And, if you're thinking with your head rather than your heart, you'd probably have to say no. But then you probably know for a fact, Nick, if, say, they did set it in Stoneville, for example, that 95% of the fan base would say, well, this is great, but why didn't we just go back to Raccoon City?
Yep. Yep, that's fair.
So you can't win, really. So what you're saying makes sense, and I do agree with you, but I must admit, being back in Raccoon City and the police station and experiencing it all again 28 years later, it got me, and it's won me over, and I imagine it's like that for a lot of people.
Oh, it is. I'm very aware I'm in the slight minority when it comes to that. I get it. I don't know. The tease of Stoneville at the very beginning of the game was one that I was not expecting. So the biggest thing with Spencer that's been generating a lot of discussion, we've touched upon it as well, is whether Spencer atoned, whether his Elpus plan, to eradicate essentially the viruses that he created, was that evidence of him atoning. I think we've already shared a lot of our views that no, it's not. And it was just him controlling the situation from beyond the grave, which ultimately he did.
I think that fits perfectly with his character. He's still manipulating, he's still pulling the strings, he's still outsmarting people, 20 years after he died.
I can't believe anyone would make this suggestion. I don't know where you would draw the line in terms of a 360 on a character, because Spencer, he wanted to control humanity. He wanted to control the evolution, humanity through the evolution. Like you say, that in the situation where the rival companies that obviously he was aware about and the pressure that he was being put under. And I think with all these antagonists, the more that they're pushed into a corner, the more obviously they're going to go from very calm and controlled to more maniacal. And, we've seen that, with Wesker, we saw that with Gideon. So I just thoroughly enjoyed the way that he was presented in the beginning, that very softly spoken. The voice actor did a great job.
He did.
With Spencer, so in that situation where he's going to lose control because obviously things that the viruses that he was using to control humanity and humanity's evolution were in the hands of others, then what better way to regain control of the situation than by this fail-safe? So any redemption arc, I just think, and obviously empathy, you can suggest that the guy that kidnapped my wife and daughter, sorry to bring it, on a personal level.
GT, I was literally about to bring it up. I was literally going to bring that up, because I think the problem that people face, and I agree, is that we see so little of Spencer throughout the entire series, and yet he hangs over it like a bad smell. But you see very little outside of, say, Resident Evil 5, so you forget his kind of personal motivations, where you see Wesker so much, and you can do a video thesis on his particular actions and go, yes, that's him. Spencer's a little bit more ambiguous, but you've got to remember how petty he was in the very, very beginning. He manipulated the Trevors just so he could experiment on a child and wife. Similar storyline, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, and then it's not even including the fact that he would easily just get his underlings to murder people.
Yeah.
Just in general. He was just he just didn't care. And so all of a sudden you go from someone in the late 80s, early 90s who was still doing all this experimentation on children and assigning people to kill his, co-founders and, all this sort of stuff to 5 years later, he's like, oh, well, I'm making this thing to save the world. It's like, yeah, there's more to this than that.
Absolutely.
You've got a bigger game going on.
He's a clever man. There's no denying that. His story kind of begins with the Travis books, doesn't he? And realising that there's something out there.
Look at the little extract from Grace's report. There's a document that's dated sometime in 1980. So this is only, 2 years after he betrayed James Marcus. He's laid out a 4-point plan. At the top of the list is his continued investment into the Wesker Children program and the T-Virus program, which is ongoing at Arkley Labs. The second point is to establish Ark as a central command centre. Stage 3 is development of Elpis. So Elpis was in his mind as early as 1980. And then the final step was the memory transfer and forced evolution. So top of his list at that time was still the T-Virus development and the Wesker Children. And Spencer was clearly not showing any kind of redemption traits in 1980. This is before he murdered James Marcus, right in the middle of his child experiments,
Exactly. It implies the idea that there's a bigger grand plan here, which was that the Elpus thing was to have him stay in control of the company, and that he was going to find some purpose for a version of himself or his ideology to stay on so that it could benefit from that program.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
He knew the internal divisions. He'd already offed Edward Ashford. He knew Alexander was doing his own thing.
Yeah.
And that was brewing away. And as you said, he probably was aware of all the rival companies, so he anticipated Elpus being, as you said, this kind of fail-safe that he could use almost, even if we ignore people like HCF from the rival company, he could use it against his own board and go, right, well, I've got Elpus, so we're doing what we're doing, otherwise I'll shut you down and kill off your T Veronica program, I'll kill off your G virus, I'll kill off this because I've got Elpus. I guess that's what that was his line. And then it became a bigger thing when, biological, pharmaceutical, bioterrorism, if you want to call it that, became more pronounced with other organisations. He's like, actually, this is even better than I perhaps anticipated. I can use this to stop all developments and other companies.
And that repeats a theme that we've seen a few times before. If you look at Resident Evil Degeneration, when Frederick Downing was trying to sell the T-Virus on the black market, he understood the virus was worth much more if you also possessed the vaccine that could completely neutralise it.
Yeah.
And likewise with Wesker, the gun pamphlets that came with Resident Evil 7 explained that the guns the Blue Umbrella and supply the BSAA with are all based on Wesker's research, because he was secretly researching ways to develop countermeasures to all of the viruses he was collecting and selling on the black market. You know, so he could stay in control of everything. If he lost possession of a virus to someone, they couldn't do a power play on him because he could neutralize it. So there was possibly something of that going on with Spencer as well. But if you watch, like the second time I played the game and I watched the Alyssa video logs, it just all feels so staged. You know, why did he only allow her to interview him? And then why randomly bring this child out and make it publicly known that he's adopted this child? He's definitely manipulating her. Definitely.
So why did he adopt Grace? I suppose is the bigger question. Why did he do this? Was he that clever to foresee people thinking she must be important?
I think that was what his thinking was. Because why, you know, if he adopted a child out of atonement, he didn't have to make it public. He's a very private man. Nobody knows much about him. Why have one of his manservants wheel out this newborn baby in the middle of an interview? To me, it just stank of trying to manipulate other people. And it clearly manipulated Gideon because he thought shit.
I was going to say, yeah, he's left breadcrumbs for Gideon. Like, clearly the way that Gideon's taken time, like there's information about Gideon's, you know, search for this girl, and like it implies that obviously he was left just enough information to give him hints about where to start looking, and it took him a number of years, and eventually he figured it out. But it's like, that's manipulative in of itself.
Yeah. There possibly is a small element of atonement, because we've seen it before with the files in Lost in Nightmares where he lets Patrick go, whereas normally we would expect Spencer to just kill him. But he just says, no, you've saved me faithfully, you've never betrayed me, and he just lets him go.
Even now, you could potentially say the reasoning behind that in this context was that so someone could pass on the child as part of the manipulative plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
You can read into it in whatever way you want now. Yeah, it's his note that has the thing about the adoption thing. So, yeah.
That's Patrick in the video.
Yeah, it could be. You never know.
It could be, but the note definitely says it's him. Yeah, so it would make the most assumption it probably is supposed to be him that you see in that hands over the child. So, yeah, possibly. Yeah, so for me, like, you could add that now as like, well, was that compassion or was that just all part of the plan? It could be either or both. It doesn't necessarily have to be both, or one or the other, but it does potentially add to it, because obviously who else is going to enact his will if he's killed this helper, you know? Like,
yeah, exactly.
He knew his time was up, so he's like, right, plan's in action. I'll let you go. You'll still fulfill my will when I'm dead.
Can I throw something else in there? Maybe it was more, rather than any kind of semblance of humanity or empathy, which I think Spencer completely lacks. You know, these types of antagonists like to almost exert control, you know, in a way that almost, you know, I can play with your life. I can save you. I can kill you, you know, at a click of a finger. And almost just he may have even enjoyed the control that he's exerting over Patrick, the fact that I can let you go. And I don't think there's any kind of self-satisfaction in that, you know, in that I've actually done something good in saving this man's life.
Hello?
It hasn't been easy. But after much effort, here we finally are.
Who are you?
I'm the one who planted that body. I'm the one that brought you here. I know now that you're the one that I've been searching for. The special one. The chosen one. Miss Ashcroft. Rest now, Grace. We have so much to do.
Shall we talk a bit more then about Grace, our heroine, and the big question, is she special or not? Answers on a postcard, yes or no?
Well, if I can quickly add, because actually that was a point I was going to make, actually, in terms of Grace, is do you think, though, the motivation with Spencer would be, you hear sort of like sports washing when certain types of states with, you know, dodgy human rights will take on a big sports event or buy into a football club, and, you know, you've heard this term sports washing, and kind of, you know...
That's what he's doing with Grace.
Yeah, exactly. Just for publicity, look, here's this interview, you know, it's just like on a personal level that Umbrella themselves were doing, in terms of, you know, we're here for humanity's great greater good.
There is some potential truth to that, and I'm sure John will say the same thing in regards to, like, by the end, when you have this Elpus reveal, it makes it seem like it's a redemption story. Like, we're all asking this question in the narrative of the game. Like, there's obviously these news reports about what's happened at Raccoon, this cover-up, and eventually this whole thing with Elpus will come out, and of course Spencer's name will get attached to it, and it'll seem like he saved us all, which, you know, and then so you add that element to it. There is a bit of truth to that.
But he created it all as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. But that's the narrative. That's the whole thing. Like, that's the whole point of these things, that they're supposed to wash away the negative. You ignore the truth of what the actual thing is, because the new narrative story is so much stronger because of what it appears to be. Regardless of who created it to begin with, it doesn't matter. He saved us all. You know, like, that's the bigger story. And that's where your wash comes from. The narrative spin, the story that leads, you know.
Do you want to start then, Rob? Grace special, yes or no?
No. The only thing that I have questions about, and John might explain this a bit further, is like, this is the thing I don't get about the game, which is that if Grace is the same as all the other children, which I guess is the implication, why is it when she sees a young girl, while admittedly blind, she doesn't recognize that girl as looking like herself? It seems very weird. Because I get that you may not have the self-cognitiveness of yourself at a young age, but wouldn't there be photos? There's photos on the bed of her and her mum throughout various times of their life. So you would expect that her mum obviously has photos of her when she was a small child, and she wouldn't like go, wow, that looks exactly like I did at that age. And so there's this weird cognitive dissonance going on there that doesn't really line up. So then I'm like, is Grace even the same clone, blah, blah, blah? Or is she just actually just another child? And then that only adds to the element that there's nothing special about her. But at the end of the day, she's only as special as, I guess, the impetus. And if she's the same as all the clones, then she has, as John alluded to earlier, like, technically some of Spencer in her, like her bloodline. So then kind of because of that, like, in its own weird way, like, that could be a narrative plot point going forwards. And so for the narrative of Requiem, no. For the future of the franchise, depends on what they want to do.
This is all very Rise of Skywalker, is it? I can't believe the similarities. I think we must have joked years ago about whether they were going to pull a episode 9 anyway. I can't believe how similar it is.
Somehow Oswald E. Spencer returned.
Yeah, it's unbelievably similar. Anyway, but that's neither here nor there. So, Rob, you've kind of gone down the halfway house.
No, I don't want to. I'd rather actually have an answer where I can just go yes or no. That's the honest truth. I would rather just sit here and go no or yes. But the simple truth is, it depends on what they do next. So, yeah. From a narrative of Requiem, no. From other things, maybe.
Sean?
Okay, well, we didn't really touch upon, when we talked about the virus chat, is whether the virus is transmissible by bite, because the opening of the game, and canonical bites are always interesting, because you always assume if it's a gameplay bite, then it's non-canon. It's just something that occurs in gameplay only. There's few and far between actual bites in the series that are seen in a cutscene or anything like that. And Grace gets bitten right in that first scene. So that would imply that if the virus is transmissible and she doesn't succumb, then I guess she must be special. But then that goes against a lot of what we find out in the game, and I do kind of like the Last Jedi approach that she's not. With regards to the fact that why doesn't she recognise herself as looking similar to Emily and the girls, then I guess she's not part of that series either. So she would have looked very different as a child. Is there actually photos of her? I can't honestly remember. Do you ever get to see photos of, like, pre-10 Grace?
No.
Yeah,
no,
so,
all the ones on the bed are all she's teenager or older.
So she may have looked different from the girls.
That is true.
Which is why she doesn't have that association, because she's not special like them. I'd like to think she isn't, but who fucking knows?
Who knows?
I'm putting my chip in the not special part of the table.
Nick, you made the same comment about, sorry to interrupt, but you made the same comment about the fact that she gets drowned in the infected blood, which she even comments about getting in her mouth, and somehow there's no issue there either.
It wouldn't be the first T-virus that's not spread through bites. Isn't the one from Death Island.
Yeah.
It's not completely out of the realms, but yes, trudging through blood that's harder to. But then I'm trying to think in the game, because Gideon goes around with his little bow gun, doesn't he? Going infecting everyone.
That thing feels like a bit closer to the Death Island thing, where you have to like have an actual close and connected infection to get it, and so he's shooting people. That's the other bit that's slightly made vague about all the ones in the care facility, because there's enacted a plan, but you don't know what that plan is and how all of a sudden most of the staff, is it literally Gideon going around and shooting them all, or is it not? Because there's an implication in the files about enacting a plan, and it's, you know, signed by him essentially, or initialed, and it's implied that someone else unwittingly, one of the staff, enacts a plan that ends up causing this, and it's left a bit vague. And so I was just like, well, then what was it? How did the stuff just shoot out of all the walls at people or something? Like, we don't know. Like, they're all just infected. The alarms go off, the nurse comes and tells Leon something's gone wrong, you know.
I think she is special because I think it's too similar to Rise of Skywalker because of her potential lineage. But the only difference I would say between Palpatine and Spencer is that Spencer's never been special from a biological point of view. I always think that's made him a little bit more interesting. He was always trying to...
Coming soon in Resident Evil 10.
I know. But Spencer's always tried to be the best, be the god, but he never was himself. He always yearned for it. You know, he found Wesker or he found whoever, but he was never that. Whereas obviously someone like Palpatine, he was force sensitive, you know, very powerful, blah, blah, blah. So it kind of came naturally to any cloned offspring that he may have in the form of Rey. I'm going to go that she was special as a way of explaining why she wasn't infected, not from the bite, because I don't think there's enough evidence within the game to show that bites did spread the virus. I'm trying to think. There's a couple of zombies eating other people.
No, but you don't see them.
Yeah, none of them get back up, no.
None of them get back up, exactly. It's like the table one isn't there, and there's the cleaner one. There's all sorts.
Even on the street when the ones are being shot, the zombies attack people. If you don't shoot them that they can't escape, they knock them on the ground, just lie there eating them for as long as you stay there until you get their attention, and none of the bodies get up.
Actually, I was trying to work out if it matched with the timeline, but I got the impression on a first playthrough that Gideon had actually almost set up that situation in the hotel in order to test with that bite a zombie attack.
Oh, that's a good point.
Guy in there to test to see if she is special, because I think, you know, it's always going to be a gameplay mechanic when Leon or Clay, you know, anyone gets bitten in the RPD and isn't infected. I mean, I like that thing. Obviously, you had an outbreak with the, you know, the virus countdown, but that's a gameplay mechanic. But I think if you see it in a cutscene, I'm going to kind of suggest that perhaps that has more weight to it. It was a first playthrough and I was trying to get all the facts together and what the hell's going on. But I thought perhaps it's Gideon kind of putting her in this, you know, this test environment to see if she is special. And when she did survive that bite, I was starting to think, you know, she clearly is immune.
It's a valid point, although people have also pointed out the weird, I guess, again, cognitive dissonance of the fact that they allow her to be in this dangerous situation with the girl and all these things and then be like, but you're special and we need to protect you. You come along with us, you know, come to Raccoon City. And you're like, well, then why did you let her roam around the place with a giant monster and like be attacked by other enemies and zombies if she was that important to you? Like, and because again, game, but like, you know, narratively, it kind of doesn't make sense. So on one hand, that makes way more sense. You're correct, GT, like that would make way more sense. But then, like, it just leads into this whole situation where that problem still exists. It's like, couldn't they just kidnapped her and then taken her to Raccoon City without all that?
Yeah, John, what about you? Where do you see Grace's specialdom?
Well, when I played through it the first time, I completed it and I thought, right, yeah, I get it. She's not special, and I was happy with that. But I must admit, when I played through it again, and I made the comment to you guys about when she's swimming in the blood and she even makes the remark, oh yeah, it's gone in my mouth, and she's not infected. It just points to me that there's something more going on, and I stake my mortgage on it that Spencer is manipulating Alessa. It wouldn't surprise me in whatever the DLC turns out to be if we find some files with Spencer outlining this grand plan for Grace. So, a bit like Rob, I'm on the fence.
Making this podcast possibly completely redundant.
Yeah,
I mean, if Batman's on the fence, then we're all fucked.
Yeah, it's all right if I'm on the fence, guys, but if he's on the fence, shit's gone wrong.
Interesting point, though, is that Zeno thinks all the clones are based on her.
This is another thing that's made me sort of change my mind a little bit, because when Zeno shows her that footage from 1990, I mean, clearly he's been with Grace for a few hours now. Is any part of him not looking at her and thinking, well, hang on, she's clearly not old enough here? Unless he knows more about Grace than what we do.
Or the project, yeah, in general.
It's so weird, that scene. I understand why everyone's like, well, that just doesn't work. He's absolutely convinced that every single clone is a copy of her. But no part of him thinks, well, hang on, you're clearly just in your early 20s. You're not bloody, nearly 40, as you should be if you're one of these clones.
Oh, yeah, or the implication would have been that these are your precursors, but you were the perfect clone, which is why Spencer kept you, would have even been an excuse for why he was interested. Even if the information was still wrong, it was manipulated from Spencer, but he doesn't even make that claim. It's kind of vague, which is why people like yourself, Nick, completely understandably, you're like, when you're playing that scene, you're like, am I playing as Grace? Hang on, wait, what? Your immediate reaction is that because the narrative seems to be pulling you in that direction until you realize, hang on, this doesn't work out, and then it isn't. So
yeah, I also think from an aesthetic point of view, when you get to the kind of Ark bit, it looks far too modern.
I have a double edge on it in that it looks too modern, but at least they made an attempt to actually make the technology that was in there not, which they didn't do with the Nest in 2, which had like flat screens and all this stuff. They actually have CRTs and old technology in this thing, which I was like, well, they've kind of learned. Like, there's a middle ground. Yeah, it looks too flash for its time. It looks kind of architecturally like way too modern, but like, at least from a lab's perspective, this actually looks like it was around in the 80s or 90s. So that's kind of cool. Like, I was like, that's an improvement over the ones from 2 and 3 remakes that looked far too modern for the 90s, even in like equipment wise.
I did like how Requiem didn't actually mention any references at all to Nest, because I know a lot of people were thinking like Ark was going to get called like, Nest Zero or something like that. Yeah, and I'm so pleased they didn't bother with it. Is it a general assumption that the facility you see in the orphanage then underneath is Ark?
Yeah, it seems like it's supposed to be the entrance or a entrance to it.
Yeah, because
and it gets destroyed in the bombing because it was behind the kind of under and behind the orphanage. But it's kind of left vague and unclear. Leon's access point is, to put it in perspective, if you think about the layout of the orphanage, Leon's access point when he reaches that sewer is to the right of the orphanage, whereas the access point that you go in the flashback is to the left of the orphanage. So in theory, the entranceway is potentially still there. It's just to the left of the subway station that you kind of end up underneath and behind the orphanage. So it doesn't nullify the fact that entrance is there. It's just that Leon accesses it from a completely different point. But it opens up a can of worms. Like, the access point that Leon gets to it's clearly a train line that you see the tracks that are leading up to the door for equipment to be delivered. The entranceway that you see coming through the facilities you visit is from a different direction. So there's another access point that was for visitors that came that had to be shuffled. Who knows what building that's accessed through? Like, I don't think it's the entrance to the orphanage at all because it's too far away. It's just another access point. So somewhere else in Raccoon there was a facility access. Then at the end of the game you see this elevated lift. The assumption is that was the access that was added by people accessing Ark after the bombing. But again, like, who, how, what, why was not explained either. It just exists. So it's all left intentionally vague, I think. And I really don't like the fact there's a bigger facility under the thing. It's very Paul W.S. Anderson, I'm sorry. And I'm hesitating to rant, but there are several things in this game that are very indebted, particularly to the final chapter, which is horrifying, because that is definitely the worst plot of those movies too.
I just don't understand why they've got to make these facilities have like massive atriums with these massive pits. It's no wonder Raccoon City is now 30 miles across with all these underground facilities with the gargantuan pits.
That is the thing I'm missing from the originals, is that those labs, that these underground labs seemed claustrophobic small tunnels that you've literally built underground. It's not easy to dig tunnels through the ground. It's not easy to cave out big facilities. Like the one in Resident Evil 2 OG seemed pretty big, and as they expanded over the years with different games and found out how deep that facility was, that seemed kind of big enough. All of a sudden they've got monster size.
None of them are going to beat Morpheus's massive silo underground.
That's true.
There are a couple of doors you actually see in Ark when you're going around it as Leon that don't open, so I can only assume that leads to the parts of the facility where you see Chloe enter.
But the thing is, as well, having a test area so close to the orphanage makes sense. It's right underneath it. Like, you want to be able to bring the children in a very close distance when you need to do your testing. Like, you don't want to have to take them through 7 miles of underground tunnels, so that kind of makes sense. So why Ark wasn't just a smaller facility or closer to the surface, but on that side of town. But the thing is, it also belays that weirdness of the fact that it also connects so closely to the other underground sewers and thus Birkin's lab because of how close the proximity is to that access point in the Resident Evil 2 remake. So I guess they were trying to go, oh, it's got a longer access point that goes off in a different direction that's much deeper, so that there wasn't just the stumbling of Umbrella employees coming across the Ark lab when they're looking for Birkin's one or something like that. It's so far-fetched to me, and it was a little bit like, oh, another giant one several miles underground. Yay. Who were the contractors that worked on this? How was the secrecy kept? You know, like, it's the old Clerks Death Star conversation, you know, the contractors. Yeah.
I must say, you touched upon a point there, guys. And I must say, for all the lore implications that Requiem adds to the series and the potential retcons and all this, the thing that annoys me the most, this is one of the most trivial things, but it has bothered me because I just think it's so nonsense. Small Midwestern town of a population of 100,000 people, 30 miles across, just before you get on the bike. Sherry tells you it's 15 miles to the centre, which means, you know, that's a radius. So the full sort of, you know, diameter, if you will, of the city is 30 miles. That's the size of London. London has something like 3.9 million people that live in it.
It's bigger than that because you're already several miles into town by the time Sherry tells you you're 15 miles. It's probably more like 40. When you're standing on top of the buildings, you can see the mountains, the Raccoon Mountains that you drove through.
Like LA.
You're already several miles into town by that point. So it's 40 easy.
Yeah, so you've got like 30, 40 mile diameter. You've got a freeway that runs through the middle of it. You know, a massive freeway like LA. If anyone's been to LA, LA's fucking big. You know, it has this massive, enormous freeway that runs right through the middle of the city. And it only has one police station? One RPD? It's just, they've completely botched it. Just nonsense. It bothers me so much more than any of the other sort of additions and things like that.
You add to the fact this thing, you know, you're talking about the freeway, but there's also like a multi-track subway station. I mean, even LA only has 6 lines, for example, and like doesn't cross the entirety of the city like this does. I mean, yeah, there's a bit of a narrative disconnect. It was ironic, you know, that I've talked to people about this also before. It's just like, well, I guess you just have to treat it like everything else in the universe. It's just like its own narrative. The thing is as well, like, is the population still 100,000 or so? Because I mean, we did that based off what the description was in the OG. Is that still the case for this version of Raccoon? Like, was the population wrong? Like,
they don't commit to that in Remake 3, do they? They don't give you the news report that gives you that figure. So yeah, it could be potentially changed.
Much bigger, but it still means then implication is that even more people died, you know, in this tragic incident. And also on top of it, the fact there's supposed to still be a Midwestern town. There is no Midwestern town, you know, it was not a town of Midwestern city that's this size even in real world, so there's nothing to compare it to. It's an amalgam of various things filtered through an international developer. You know, they've just decided, and I think unfortunately that's one of the things from a cognitive sense that have lost the understanding of what the scope and scale of this was. Like, the reason why it kind of was hidden in plain sight was the fact that the town was big enough but not too big, whereas I think now you're getting these giant facilities under the ground. You got probably tens of thousands of employees, let alone the, you know, potential hundreds of thousands to millions of population. It starts to lose its tenure. It's, as I said, like jokingly but kind of truthfully, like, how was this facility built? How did nobody know about it if there had to be thousands of people working underground to build it? Like, this is where I start to say, where instead of this isn't a retcon per se, I mean it is, but it's also just a recontextualization of like what Spencer was doing at the time, but it adds all these other questions that you can't answer around it that just don't logically make sense or add more problems than they have solutions. And yeah, whether or not you choose to go down those paths or not. I've said the same thing to other people about the orphanage, and I think I may have mentioned in the last episode as well. It's just like, you can treat the orphanage wholesale what happens in Requiem without it impacting the OG to remake laws, because they are two completely separate uses of the orphanage, and whether or not they all happen is just the way the canon line goes. But it's the implications of how far you take that and how much you feel it's messed with things, or how you feel over the OGs to new games in the same sense. So does this, you know, recontextualize and retcon a bunch of stuff. So yeah.
Hey, checking in.
Good timing.
Did you find anything on Elpus?
Not yet. Nothing on the servers at the CIA or the Pentagon.
Maybe we need a higher clearance.
I requested one, and I was told to shut down the investigation.
What? Why?
Orders from on high.
Look, we don't need you taking a hit for this. I'll just go it alone.
We're in this together. Till the end. I've always been good at working in the shadows.
Just don't do anything too risky, yeah?
Me? Never.
Can we move on to Leon? Yes, our other hero. There's still lots to talk about with Leon, but nothing particularly groundbreaking. I suppose the big thing that arises from him is Raccoon City Syndrome, something that is made out to be quite an important plot point, but it's kind of forgotten about, really, by the end. I'll take this Elpis and you'll be fine. It kind of nicely resolves itself, but I think the lingering issues with Raccoon City Syndrome relates to, well, this is something that survivors of Raccoon City were infected by. We get the list at the beginning of the game with like Michael Warren and other people, presumably Alyssa as well. But also, one would assume Claire, Jill, we know Sherry is as well, and anyone else that survived Raccoon City. Does this cause problems, specifically relating to people like Jill, who her infection has been dealt with quite comfortably within Resident Evil 5 and used as a major plot point, with the Nemesis infecting her? We know, obviously, Leon's infected in Resident Evil 4 with the Plagas, then reinfected again in Death Island. Whether Chris has got RCS, because is RCS related to every T-virus or just the Birkin strain that was released in Raccoon City? We don't know. Rebecca was infected in Death Island, but then she developed the A-virus vaccine. Claire's still, as far as I can tell, infected with T-Phobos virus, so she mustn't get scared. If she gets scared, she's going to mutate, I guess. No, she'll be killed. Sorry, no, T-Phobos doesn't mutate women, if I remember correctly. It's an interesting plot point they raised. Again, is it something, let's say they removed RCS as a plot point, would it have made any difference to the storyline at all?
The thing is, you asked the question at the beginning there, Nick, is it problematic, RCS and the whole sort of T-virus thing? And the only thing I can answer that with is, Sherry's supposed to be immune from all this due to her bonding with the G-virus. So the reason why I say it's possibly problematic is, I don't think Capcom considered her immunity when they wrote this game. Like the writer who decided to reintroduce Sherry to the series, I don't know whether they considered her immunity when they inserted her into the title and gave her RCS. Now, you could caveat it by saying, well, she's clearly got a lesser infection. That could be, the G-virus holding it at bay. But technically speaking, she's not really supposed to have any vulnerability to a virus. She is essentially immortal, or the closest thing this series has had to being immortal. Let's not forget, an entire helicopter propeller was pulled from her spine in RE6, and it healed like fucking Wolverine. She is essentially impervious to harm, and all of a sudden she now has this RCS, and I genuinely, going back to your question, don't know if that was considered when they wrote the story to this game. And so that therefore paves the way for all these sorts of issues, and one of the reasons why Requiem frustrates me is because of the lack of establishing the rules before the game begins. So you're given a selection of characters that have had Raccoon City Syndrome. You've got 2 characters within this title that have it, but no mention of, like you say, Jill, Claire, Rebecca, Chris, all these people who potentially have this condition and were just left on tenterhooks. In Grace's report would have been a great place to put in, other people suffering from RCS, Claire Redfield, were all cured during, administering the Elpis. But they don't. They leave it all completely vague, and we just still sat here going, well, is Claire or Ada dead? Have they succumbed to it? Or are they alive? We've got this massive, massive uncertainty, and I think it's a flaw on the game's part, unless it's intentional, and will all be answered in DLC.
Yeah, I was going to say there's 2 reasons. The first one is going to be addressed in DLC, which is why they've deliberately not referenced it. Or the second reason could be what Nick was talking about, in the fact that these characters have got such a complicated backstory with various viruses they've had and vaccines. They don't want to tie themselves up in knots, potentially make a mistake, so they're just playing it safe by not including any of these characters. When you talk about Sherry, there's obviously some sort of complexity to her gift, if you like, because if it was completely absolute, we wouldn't have needed Jake in Resident Evil 6, because Sherry's infection alone should have been enough to fight off the C virus, but it wasn't. They still needed Jake.
Yeah, and she even talks about how she's been tested, hasn't she, for this?
Yeah.
I don't mind the idea of a latent T virus. I think that's quite a clever thing to do, but it does raise the idea that was it airborne virus, which would be new. That wasn't true of Birkin's strain.
I just see it more as like a side effect in the same way that like asbestos manifests problems over people over a long period of exposure. If you breathe it in now, the effects aren't going to manifest themselves until 25, 30 years in the future. You can potentially live with asbestos poisoning, but one day it may kill you, and I think that's similar to how they've approached Raccoon City Syndrome. Leon was never infected, but he was exposed to like things in the air and whatever, and that's enough to sort of just latch itself to his nervous system and eventually manifest at some point later.
And if Zeno is a clone of Wesker, then it stands to reason that the STARS members in the mansion were exposed to it too, because that's the only way it would make sense for Zeno to have RCS as well.
Yeah, I think Hunk's got it as well.
Yeah, Hunk's got it. Yeah.
I'm stating the obvious here, but it goes back to the same problem I've been banging on for quite some time. The inconsistency is just occurring because there's no consistency with the writers. And obviously you're going to have, bring in new writers and different producers, but there's never felt like there has perhaps with other series to have like kind of one overall person keeping an eye on things, almost like an executive producer, but someone that's just making sure there's like a consistency throughout these games. I think it's a fantastic analogy Stars gives with asbestos. And I think that Capcom or the writers here are just presuming that Elpis is going to be a be-all, cure-all for all the major characters that they're concerned about. Those are easily contactable within the structures of the organizations that they work for, but then those outside of those organizations that are controlled by, our protagonist, for example, like Ada, I don't think Capcom haven't shown much care or consideration for that character for some time, really, in terms of her having any consistency, in the narrative. And I totally agree. I don't think the writer of this game had any clue of the nuances of Sherry's immunity through the events of Resident Evil 2.
I'm guessing that if she has Elpis, she's no longer going to be superpowered. She's just going to be normal Sherry going forward.
What kind of annoyed me as well is like how Leon seemed shocked when it was confirmed to be the T virus. I mean, did he not think, well, hang on, given what I've gone through, why isn't he on the phone to Rebecca saying, will you have a look at these black blotches on my hands? I'm quite worried about them.
To caveat that, though, he has been injected with Plagas and he's had other things in his life. So the fact is not an assumption that there's something is still in his system from something he's had, regardless of whether or not it was the T virus or not. There's a bigger question.
Could be
a wider problem, isn't it? We said this in the last podcast. It's the MCU problem. When you've got any character in the series potentially a phone call away, why don't they? It's all very isolated and unique to this title. But yeah, in a real world situation, you would think, he would be calling people like Rebecca, who's managed to make successful vaccines for these kind of things before. Why don't he get old Frederick Downing on the phone?
Yeah.
And say, oh, you bastard, give me that fucking vaccine.
That's what he's known for.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't they dig the resurrected corpse of Greg Mueller and get daylight going again?
Oh, what an opportunity that would have been.
Yeah. I mean, this is interesting. We can just split off just briefly. Does this call into question? Because it's said it's a dormant thing that builds the resistances to vaccines and stuff over the course of 30 years or 28 years or whatever it is. So does this essentially nullify Daylight and Will Farmer's vaccine? Are they essentially made redundant in the long run? Not necessarily at the time, but of all the people who have been exposed to T-virus outbreaks in the series due to bioterrorism attacks or whatever, all the people that have had the Will Farmer vaccines, are they essentially ticking time bombs now that in 25, 30 years are going to start manifesting the syndrome?
Yeah.
Or is it just the exclusive Birkins, the strain that was released in Raccoon City? Perhaps there hasn't been anyone. Perhaps Ark has not been affected because it's not Sheena Island syndrome or something like, is it because it's a different variant? I don't know.
Like I say, I think because Zeno's got it, if he's a clone of Wesker, then Wesker had it, and Wesker must have got it at the mansion because he wasn't in Raccoon City.
That's true.
Gave us closure to Michael Warren though, which was nice.
It did.
It was
nice.
A fitting end.
Didn't get very far though, did he? And he moved about 20 miles down the road. A social media point with Leon, his marriage. Oh yes, that's been generating a lot of discussion points. We won't talk too much about it, but I just wanted to raise it that he has a wedding ring. Who's he married to? Who knows? Any
Who cares?
Theories, chaps? Who cares? Any theories, chaps?
Rather than the, I totally agree with the who cares bit. Anyone, that people have been suggesting, Sherry, just take a look at that fucking epilogue picture of Leon and Claire and Sherry, just to see the age gap between the two of them. I just think it's ridiculous.
Can you remember when Resident Evil 6 came out and Chris had, for some bizarre reason, he had like a necklace, like a chain with a ring on the end of it, and everyone then was like speculating, is it Jill's ring? Is it? And everyone thought it was this major deal, and they just didn't address it at all, and it just turned out to be absolutely nothing.
I think Leon's relationship to Sherry can be summed up in Remake 2 when Claire introduces Sherry to Leon. He goes, "Leon, this is Sherry," and he goes, "Okay."
But then they have that weird moment in the Remake 2 ending where they're all holding hands walking into the sunset, and that's just fucking weird. If she then goes on to be his wife, it's very fucking wrong. People need their hard drives checking, I'm telling you. Honestly.
Were you pleased with Sherry in the game overall?
Look, she's one of my favourite characters in the entire series, and I absolutely adored the direction they went with in Resident Evil 6, and I'm overjoyed beyond words that she's back in this. I just didn't really want to see her reduced to a desk role. Like, if they'd rolled with this in 6, I would have said at the time, back in 2012, that this was a really, clever way of bringing her into the series. From a handler sort of comms role. I was like, oh, that's a really clever way of bringing back this child character. The fact that they made her like an action hero wasn't what I was expecting. I never thought it would work, but fucking hell, I love her so much in Resident Evil 6. It's just done so well. And her characterization is so on point in that game. For all that game's faults, she's so on point. So in Requiem, she's definitely been reduced in ability, and that could all be fixed if the DLC focuses on her in some way. And I really, really hope it does. I really hope the only reason they've gone to the extent of bringing her back in the capacity that they have and getting Eden Regal back and everything is because they've got bigger plans for her. Because as much as I am overjoyed she's back, I do think she's kind of underused. As great as she's in Leon's ear the whole game, the entire time you were playing as Leon, you're basically spending it with Sherry, and that's really, really cool, and I'm so happy for that. But I just feel like I've been saying this for 15 years. She should have the keys to the franchise. This franchise should be hers now. She's the leading the generation of new characters, and being tied to a desk role is not necessarily where I wanted her to be. I hope the fact that she's now back means they've got more in line for her in the future. And I am taking it, guys, I'm going to say this, I'm taking it as Leon's little quip that he says to her during the ending, that you're going to be back in action in no time, is a hint that she is going to be featured in some big way soon.
I think they will. I mean, I remember when we looked at Remake 4 when it came out and being a little bit disappointed with Ada's role in Leon's campaign as very subdued and not particularly interesting, and then being blown away really by how brilliant Separate Ways was for Remake 4 especially, and really fleshing out Ada. I'm kind of using that example again. I think Sherry's much better than Ada in the main campaign, but I think there's certainly scope to make it better. So I'll cling on to that hope with you, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the little character beats and stuff like that. I really, really love the moment, and I feel it's a perfect continuation of how much she holds Leon in admiration. Her moment in Resident Evil 6 where she talks to Jake about how she's spent her entire life basically living up to Leon and Claire.
Mm.
And the bit where Leon, when he's driving to Raccoon, and he tells her to back away because he doesn't want her to take the hit for it, and she's just like, absolutely not. I'm with you to the end and stuff. And I just think stuff like that's cool. She's ace, isn't she? Come on, she's cool.
I've been waiting for you, Grace.
Who are you?
Raccoon City. You're the reason for its destruction, but you're also the key to building a brave new world. You're the final piece. Let us show you your true purpose.
Let's talk about someone who thinks he's cool, and that's Zeno. The implication is, and we've already kind of touched upon it already, is that this is a clone of some sort of Wesker. We don't know which. I mean, I've gone on the idea that it is a successful mutated T-virus memory adaptation, which again is painfully close to the final chapter. The other possibilities up for discussion, and I'll open it up to the floor, is this Derek Wesker or any of the other Wesker children back with us? Is this also the executive from Umbrella Corps? English-speaking Umbrella Corps multiplayer game would know that DC Douglas reprised his role in that, and there's lots of multiplayer hints that Albert Wesker is back. That could tie in quite nicely. Or is it someone who thinks he's Wesker, or is it someone that's perhaps had his memory adapted in some way to make him think it's Wesker, but then I suppose he's got the same sort of powers as RE5 Wesker. So what was everyone's thoughts when they were playing? What was his goals? And obviously it's something to do with the connections. He's clearly a higher up with them.
I will just say that the fandom's been speculating so much that Wesker's going to return in some capacity, and I think we've all been collectively dreading that moment. And then when the shutter door lifted, I think we were all like, all our horrors are coming to fruition right now. But then it goes in a weird, interesting direction. And I'm kind of almost thankful, as much as I'm not keen on Zeno as a plot point, this does hopefully put to bed that they will ever bring back Wesker in an official capacity. Because it feels like they've kind of met the fandom in the middle, that you can't have a Wesker, but you can have a Wesker-like. We're not going to tell you exactly what his origins are or anything like that, but there's enough there if you want it to be whatever you wanted from the potential of Wesker being back. You ask, could it be the executive? I would like that, because I think finally we can put that to bed.
Yep.
I think, some people in the fandom do quote Umbrella Corps for some reason, I don't know why. But it is a valid plot point. The game has been mentioned in a couple of interviews back in 2016 that it was canon, and that aspects of it were going to influence the series. So we could tick that off. With regards to him as a character, the only thing we're given is Victor Gideon's very, very brief quip at the end, taunt, if you will, that he is just an imitation. And there is a great moment that the mocap really sells, is his look of almost shock that he's told that he's just nothing but an imitation. He almost can't believe he's heard that. So is that a revelation to him at that point as well?
That's a good point. I never really considered that.
Yeah, I love the idea that it'd be a revelation. I just thought it's just always really intrigued me when you have these, whether it's a protagonist or antagonist character that kind of either thinks that they're an original, or perhaps, with Bruce Willis' Sixth Sense, isn't aware of their mortality. I absolutely love that shock, that realization. He thought he was the original, but he's just like a Kodak copy.
He just takes a moment. Craig Bernard, I presume it's Craig's mocap that really sells it, but he just kind of takes it. He kind of stops walking for a second, goes wide-eyed, and just looks like he has a moment of pause or revelation, and it's immediately after Victor tells him he's nothing but an imitation, and it's almost like, am I really? I thought I was the OG. I thought I was the man. Because he goes through the game with a certain sense of swagger about him, like he feels he's more important than he actually is,
Yeah, and that's why he just arrogantly injects himself at the end without even knowing what it does. That's that Wesker narcissism coming through. That supreme confidence that whatever it is, he can overcome it.
You kind of get a sort of a flavour of that with the girl, because I thought it was great, but then when you discover that it's one of the clones, when she, sees the projector, and I was made.
I mean, when I first saw him, I thought it was Wesker, and I was like, oh, Jesus. And when he had the black marks on his face, I thought, oh, that was possibly some sort of silly Ouroboros scarring or something. But I actually ended up liking him, I must admit. Just the little mannerisms he had, with the cigarettes and whatnot. And I thought Craig did a really good job, considering he was not criticised, but some people weren't happy with his performance in Remake 4 because he just sounded like generic bad guy. I thought he was really, really good in this.
I love the moment where Grace says she'll do the password thing if she lets Leon live. And he has this and the mocap's amazing. Craig sells it so well. He just kind of almost frustratingly just walks away and just goes, very well. And it's just, I don't know, just little nuances, character nuances like that. I just love the current age of Capcom doing, getting the voice actors in to do the motion capture. I really think sells it in little moments like that, because you just get so many little nuances of frustrations or overconfidence and things that just standard voice acting doesn't get you. Yeah. And I must say, I was one of those people, John, who didn't particularly like his role as Wesker, because I did just think it was snarling villain. And I think people like Richard Wow previously had brought a sort of
Britishness.
Yeah.
it's like yeah, I know, you know,
a bit of regality to it,
yes.
if you like, to the role. And I just felt Wesker in Remake 4 was just, typical villain. Whereas I agree with you, John. I think he's kind of great as Zeno. He's fun, and he seems to be really chewing it up and having fun with it in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it doesn't bother me anywhere near as much as I felt it should have done. Yeah, I felt like I should be hating this every single second, but he's kind of fun. And he kind of rolls off Grace really well, and I think that those two play those scenes really well, and it's really good fun to watch. I think it's very enjoyable.
I like the idea that Zeno thinks he's important but isn't, and in fact is almost like a pawn of the connections. He thinks he's important, he thinks he's all in control, and he thinks he may be making the decisions for the connections, but I like the idea that there is still a big bad still to come from the connections, and I think Victor was possibly higher up in the connections than Zeno realised. Hence the comment, as you say, about you're just an imitation, suggesting there's probably more of them, which I wouldn't be surprised if... Yeah, which they'll go down that route if they want to do a kind of Wesker Redfield finale of some description. I think that's where they're going with it. I think it's a successful T-Virus memory thing that Victor created, Zeno and other Zeno. It was also, I haven't seen anyone mention this before, but it's probably a coincidence. The concept art for Wesker in Code Veronica says he works for what company, John?
World Xenobiology Company.
Well, there you go.
Load of bollocks.
So the fact that he's called Zeno for the rival company that may or may not have been called the World Zeno whatever at some point, I found quite an amusing little unintentional callback, shall we say.
Someone did a really good video on YouTube. I can't remember the name of it now, but he had the same theory as you, Nick. He thought he'd been exposed to this memory transfer virus, and that's why he had certain traits of Wesker, such as the slick back hair, the sunglasses, but he was different in the fact that he had a white suit and he smoked, and as far as we know, Wesker never smoked. And he said the visual symbolism of the sort of 20% of Wesker in Zeno was the black coat on him. That's Wesker's sort of trademark thing, and the fact he has it draped over his shoulders is significant of the Wesker influence in his mind. I thought that was like a really cool analogy.
Yeah, all very Snoke though, isn't it? Again, the drug star was back into
bad, Nick, bad. Stop
it. There's too many. There's far too many similarities.
Can I take an aside as you say this to have a moan about the final chapter? Can I do this? I guess the way to say it is that for many, many years, Paul W.S. Anderson and his wife, Mila Jovovich, who plays Alice, would constantly point at a bunch of these games and be like, oh, they did that because we did this. And it's like, yeah, okay. The fact you turned the entire planet into a desert is probably not why they went to Africa in Resident Evil 5. I think it's just because there's deserts in Africa, because it's not the same thing. But I think as of this game, I can specifically say there is definitely some crossover. You've got apocalypse filters and outfits that match the tone of the movie. You have the return to Raccoon City with the return to the giant hive, which is really more like the Ark is than the original labs were in the original game. There's a whole thing to do with blood memory and clones that's in this. There's even like a genetic key in a child that's still connected, that has a connection here with clones of children and clones of other people, which the whole franchise wasn't shy from. I mean, yeah, it's painful. I'm sorry. This whole returning back to the origin thing. There's even like the motorcycle thing. Alice rides across the Raccoon City on a motorcycle and gets attacked. The lab at the very end of the movie is not particularly that dissimilar from Ark's kind of style, and there's a whole like airborne antiviral agent in the thing which is not that far removed from Elpus either. Like, it's to cure the global threat. Like, it's a little above coincidence, I think, at this point. And was probably the thing that I walked away going, they did all this? Really? I'm not the only one that noticed all this, I'm assuming. I don't know what to say. Do I hand in my fandom card now?
I'm afraid our Anderson quota has expired. So
it's the buzzer.
Let's move on, and I want to talk about a lingering plot point that actually kind of got a bit of resolution with the connections. But before we do, just something I wanted to pick up with Sean earlier, we were speaking about how Nest was casually avoided being referenced at all during Resident Evil Requiem, and that got me thinking earlier. Other than those flashbacks at the RPD, which I suppose aren't a million miles off what happens in the OG Resident Evil 2, if you're a bit of a lore arsehole like myself, that doesn't particularly like the remakes in terms of whether that's canonical and all that majabi, is the only problematic element really in Requiem the kendo flashbacks? Yeah. That is my thinking.
The only thing you'd have to headcanon is the fact that the skeleton that Leon sees in the back of the kendo gun shop is not Emma's, it's actually Robert's, but it's too small.
Yes.
And obviously there's a prescription receipt for a character that didn't exist in the OG, but then could have still done because she might well have just been just beneath the counter there. You know, you just didn't see her in OG2. She's there. She's in the original scene, but Kendo's just keeping her just ducked down behind the counter because who is this fucking weird biker girl, an RPD cop, walking in my shop?
That's actually remarkably restrained, isn't it? Really,
it is, and this is why I was because I was honestly thinking we were going to get like massive Nest references, and when we arrived in Ark, I honestly thought we were going to get a voiceover similar to Remake 2, like "Welcome to Nest Zero" or something like that, and it never happened. And then I thought we're going to definitely get a file which says, "Oh, we're going to be shipping a bunch of supplies to the Nest facility in Raccoon," you know, and none of it happened. Like they literally, the word Nest. If you could literally extract the game's data and do a search for the word Nest, I don't think it'd bring you up anything. And that's amazing. I can't believe that.
Even the loading screen where it gives you the little descriptions refers to it as the Raccoon City Underground Laboratory.
You see, Nicholas? There you go.
So there you go. If you're being a stickler, you can just go Requiem still fits relatively well. I'm just going to ignore the kendo bit, or at least headcanon.
You don't even have to technically ignore it. You can just say it's that same thing we've talked about, is that there's always an event where Leon meets Kendo, but what the context of that is left to your interpretations.
Yeah.
Like,
yes, yeah.
And it goes beyond that as well, because it's like, correct me if I'm wrong, John, I'll fire this one to you, but like Requiem is the first game in the RE Engine series that actually acknowledges that Barry is a person. I don't think he's mentioned in Remake 3 or Remake 2.
No,
so
I
like
think
Barry Burton
you're right.
exists again.
Yeah.
Baz is back.
But, you know, that's a big thing because, you know, we've gone on record before about how frustrated we were to, you know, the fact that Remake 2 is so vague in all of its connections to the rest of the series. You know, when you think about, like, if you take the N64 version with the EX files in consideration, OG2 is so connected to so many games in the series that when you play Remake 2 and you don't even get like a comprehensive mansion report like you did in the original game, it's frustrating because I get the fact that they were using it as a springboard to like kind of restart this new era of games with the RE engine and stuff like that, and that's fine. You know, I understand that from a point of view of bringing in newcomers, you don't want the baggage of however many years of lore it was at that point, so I understand that. But the problem is, now we're in a situation where Requiem has bolted on all this shit to Raccoon City, and Resident Evil 3 has its own thing with whatever it did. And then if we are really getting like a Resident Evil 0 remake, and if the latest leaks are true, we're going to be getting a Resident Evil 1 remake soon, then it stands to reason that we're going to get all these weird, bizarre additional connections to the connections, potentially the family, all HCF and all stuff. And then Remake 2 will now be this weird, non-referential game to the rest of the series. If you've got 0 that's going to happily talk about connections and Marcus and all that, and then you go to Resident Evil 2 Remake and it's just so vague and it doesn't really do anything. It's got this.
It will be weird.
It's going to have this strange disconnect, yeah.
But it was disconnected from 3 as well. 3 was so heavily tied into time and date specific and all this, and it was, you know, I felt Remake 3 felt different to Remake 2.
But the irony of that for me is that they didn't take the opportunity to. I still don't understand why they didn't connect. If they're going to remake 3 and they made that decision to remake 3 during the development of Remake 2, why they didn't connect those more? Because they knew they were remaking them both. Like, I still don't. Like, I know at one point there was discussions in Capcom very early on about them when they were first thinking about remaking 2. They were going to just put 2 and 3 together, and that was going to be one game. And then they realized that was just too ambitious because they didn't know what the flavor and what the actual sales and what the expectations were going to be on, and they knew the project was going to be big, so they didn't pursue that in the end. But I wish they'd kept that idea that at least now we're remaking 3, that you would connect these things. But it's also very frustrating in that same sense going back that way, because as you said, like, you connect all these other things. It's so funny that they missed the entire point of why they even restarted the original RE2 back in 1997, was because one of the feedbacks they had was that there wasn't enough connective tissue with the new plot, and they needed to tie the original game to this new sequel because it was so standalone. And so that's why, you know, they swapped out a character that had a connection. They put Claire in as a connection to Chris, and why they made more references to the Raccoon City incident and tied the elements together and tried to put some of those references in, was entirely to remind people of those connections. And yet when they remade the game, all these years later, they completely missed that point.
I've never considered that, Rob. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, because they sort of fulfilled the original 1.5 mission statement, didn't they, with the remake?
Yeah, to make something completely relatively standalone and very unreference heavy to, even, one of the more simple ways they did that was, the whole stuff with Marvin in the original, and even that's so glossed over. It doesn't reference, what actually caused it, and nobody believed the STARS members and blah, blah, blah. That's all gone. The introduction that explains the whole incident that happened in the mountains is gone. The Umbrella explanation, what they are, is basically left to just whatever you glean from in the game. It's such a weird choice, and exacerbated by the choices made by the remake of 3 as well.
Yeah, the only thing that it feels like they truly set up and paid off was Marvin's line of, if you see one of those things, uniform or not, do not hesitate, which obviously pays off somewhat with the Brad scene. But that is literally it. That's literally the only thing I feel that is that connective tissue between the two games.
I mean, we've talked about it, but like even visually, the continuity is wrong, and this still applies to Requiem. Like, I don't understand why all of a sudden there's all these piles of cars built up that are in areas where there shouldn't be. You can't just say the blast wave knocked these cars into these perfect piles, but obviously it's just gameplay element. It just needs to create a path so that you follow the path.
And seemingly created new iron design of the front gates.
Yeah, that's weird. That is something like that. I genuinely don't understand, because you think they would just take the original assets and modify them, add some damage here and there. It makes you wonder whether it's a beta design that they've lifted.
Yeah, lifted. It could have just been overlooked, because I'd say the interior of the RPD itself looks pretty spot on in that regard. It really does. I don't think there's a lot of mismatch of anything. And then like that, there's those little nods, because as people pointed out, like there's a zombie that bangs on the vending machine, exactly like remake version of that scene where the zombie's trying to bang on the vending machine, and there's like these little nice nods. So they've obviously paid attention and so much the details. I think to moan about the fences to be very particularly nitpicky, and I've seen lots of other people do it too. But
let me spin it in a positive way for the fandom, and you are going to accept this because I have spoken. The RPD gate is the new Nemesis window. You're welcome.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, remake discussions aside, which are always fascinating, one of the points that I suppose stemmed from Resident Evil 7 and 8 was the introduction of the connections, and I think a lot of us were questioning whether they would be involved, and I was really pleased to see that they are, front and centre of this, and are now very much established as the villains of this new generation of Resident Evil, which is fine. It does somewhat diminish the role of Blue Umbrella. We can have a quick chat about that a bit later on, but let's focus on the connections. And firstly, the absolute retcon is Brandon Bailey. The file that has haunted John's dreams for years is cured.
Yeah, I'm glad they fixed that, because it just made no sense to me.
I was going to argue, I was like, could you really say it's a retcon? It's like putting it back where it should have been, as far as I'm concerned. Like, the retcon was when all of a sudden it just was doing this, and you're like, what? Now, like, actually figuring out that wasn't a good approach essentially fixes that. So I think this is, if you're going to call it a retcon, it's for the right reasons, but essentially it's like back to where it should have been.
So just a reminder for people who are unaware, so in the report following Village, Baker reports. Yeah, it puts Brandon Bailey as the leader of the connections, which for all sorts of reasons was problematic, mainly because of his supposed death in, 1998?
Yeah, roundabout then.
Thank you. Very good. 1 point to me. And and how that revolved with RE5, especially as he was a kind of like Marcus's assistant leading up to the discovery of Progenitor and all that kind of thing. It didn't feel like a natural fit. And I remember the discussions at the time when Brandon fucking Bailey, what? It kind of is like pulled out of the hat. So they've changed this in Grace's report as a kind of rumour or misinformation. He wasn't in fact the leader of the connections, he was just part of it, which is great because I think that leaves it open to actually having a proper villain at some point in the future.
I thought it was really cool how they brought James Marcus into it. I thought that fit really well with him being essentially kicked out of Umbrella, because it doesn't harm anything.
Agreed.
It doesn't change his story in any way. He's still at the training facility. He's still working on his leeches, but he's now funneling information to the connections. Yeah,
it's a perfect example of something that's recontextualized, but doesn't change the continuity. So it's not a retcon; it just expands the information, and so. Yeah, that's one of those perfect examples of that, where like it doesn't change narratively anything as far as the character is concerned, but it adds growth to like the narrative of like what he was doing and without impacting anything. So it fits perfectly.
You're happier with Brandon Bailey, not expecting an old Brandon Bailey to turn up in future games.
No, I think it makes sense that it follows on from what we learn about him in Resident Evil 5. He was bitter after James Marcus died, so he's like, fuck it, I'll carry on where he left off. I'll contact the connections and be their mole inside Umbrella. I think it works really well.
And that kind of adds more impetus to the death angle, because, you could say there's something that went on that we don't know why he died.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
exactly,
it's not explained. So that could have been like all of a sudden someone, an Umbrella took him out, Who knows?
I think it also helps as well because connections are introduced in Resident Evil 7 with Lucas working with them, and it's not abundantly clear as to what they do, because aren't they referred in 7 as more of a criminal organisation as opposed to, say, a pharmaceutical organisation?
Yeah, they're just a crime syndicate. They specialise in like drugs trafficking and money laundering and obviously bioweaponry. And Grace's report says they were trying to sort of get an angle into Umbrella's operations from like the 1980s. So, but they got their breakthrough when they contacted Miranda, likely through Brandon Bailey, and got access to the mould. And they obviously worked with HCF as well. And again, Grace's report says Tricell and HCF frequently worked with the connections.
So do we think that there's an evolution then of what they were? If they started, as you said, started off as a kind of criminal enterprise and dealing with all sorts, but then have actually merged and become, evolved into more of a, what we would call somewhat like Tricell was, or at least, that wing of it, or Umbrella was, developing bioweapons. And we can see that by the end of Requiem, they're using Ark, basically a bit like what Spencer Rain was being used as a showcase. They have their own catalogue of BOWs. They've changed their business model, should we say?
Yeah, there is an element of that, but what's interesting is they don't seem to be creating their own viruses. They're quite happy to just take existing products and exploit them. But yeah, they secured Ark before Raccoon City was bombed and have been running it ever since alongside the traitorous factions of the government. And I think the game hints, I think there's a file that hints like Ark is basically all automated, so I don't really think there's any personnel there 24/7. I think it's all self-running, which I thought was interesting. I do like the world-building idea that this crater in the middle of Raccoon City, really the last place anyone would look, has been housing this secret illegal bioweapons trafficking hub.
And I also wonder, just from a logistical point of view as well, it almost makes sense that they would run it because they're not actually a direct competitor, at least what Tricell and perhaps HCF would think. So if they're hosting an auction or, they're using it as this kind of drug run, would it not be better from, say, Tricell's point of view to have someone like the Connections run it rather than a direct competitor who might try and undermine them, going, oh, look, we've got, the brand new Hunters available, we'll charge you X for this or whatnot, but if you're having almost an independent organisation run it that's not explicitly at that point in the bioweapons market, they're just the kind of money men, that would suggest, I would think, that the other companies would be happier with that setup rather than Umbrella run it or whoever run it.
Yeah, possibly.
I think that works very well. Do we think HCF is now 100% the rival company?
I still think there's a possibility they might just retcon HCF to be part of the Connections. I think, the Code Veronica remake will probably answer that question conclusively. But yeah, I think HCF is now the name of the company, yeah.
Because they were still going up to like 2017, if not longer. I just wonder who was, as I said earlier, who was using it. If the connections were still running it at some point. I think it must have been with the folding of Tricell. There wasn't that many big companies left. I wonder if that's the point they started to go, right, well, we're going to start developing the bioweapons and start using it as a kind of showcase for our products using the existing weaponry. And I wonder if that's the point or the catalyst to their business model change.
Well, Zeno says every single year representatives from dozens of countries come to Ark to discuss bioweapons trade. We don't know what happened to HCF. The last we've heard from them was Resident Evil 4, and that's where
7.
Yeah, but the reference to 7 was dated in 2000.
Oh, was it? Oh,
yeah,
right, okay.
Yeah. When Blue Umbrella were introduced, the prevailing theory at that time was, well, Blue Umbrella is maybe run by executives of the rival company because Wesker, one of his goals before he switched to Ouroboros was to revive Umbrella, and he was going to use the rival company to do that. And I suggested at the time that when he faked his death in Lost in Nightmares and joined Tricell, his sort of loyal followers in the rival company carried on with his plan to resurrect Umbrella, and that's ultimately what happened in 7. However, I think now, given Blue Umbrella's absence in Requiem, I think I was totally wrong about the importance of Blue Umbrella. I think they're not a big deal at all. I think when we saw them at the end of 7, everyone thought, shit, Umbrella's back, they're bound to be evil, this is going to start a big plot arc, and I just don't think Capcom ever intended that at all. I don't think they've got an illegal side. I think the organisation in Umbrella Corps is possibly the connections now, because it would make sense for them to have like a testing replica of the Raccoon City police station, for example, if they're in control of, the Raccoon City ruins. Zeno obviously fits as the executive, and I think the red and white umbrella shield we see in that game is, it's not meant to be taken literally, it's more symbolic. Because even Resident Evil 7 itself says the blue umbrella represents, the new umbrella post-reformation, and the red and white colours represent Spencer's original umbrella.
I was going to say, I wonder how much confusion if that was caused from
us.
The potential, well, yeah, and the potential Not a Hero rewrite. I'd love to know what that original draft was. I know there's been hints from various data minings and stuff like that, but I wonder if some of the problems would literally arise from the rewrite. Because I think they just didn't want to paint Chris in any kind of negative light, so they kind of retro-inserted the BSAA as being in charge of the operation, but kind of not. And then I think it went from there, and I wonder if that actually harmed things. I almost feel like the Blue Umbrella logo inserted clumsily into Village is almost like, again, just a band-aid over an issue that they created, almost.
It feels like a lot of the stuff in this is a tidy up. Even that conversation I think Leon has with Sherry about the infighting and the BSAA and all that sort of comment that he mentions, as well as trying to tidy up all the loose hanging threads of this so that they can shuffle that into a very narrow corner at some point.
I think we've pushed that previous theory quite heavily, just because if you just played 7 and 8 and even read the gun pamphlet stuff that came out with 7, Blue Umbrella was very much the goodie. They were a changed organisation. They used the Umbrella name on purpose to show, it can be good. We're making all this lovely weaponry, but then, as you said, you could easily then deduce what was going on. They're using Albert Wesker's notes, and as you said, he was perhaps trying to just control the entire black market of the BOWs, which we knew he was. I think the mistake we made was placing a little bit too much emphasis on Umbrella Corps. I think we all got a little bit caught up in it because it was never an important game in the overall scheme of things. There's some elements that are interesting, but it's hard, a kind of multiplayer shoot 'em up.
I'm going to stand here and say I never got caught up in any of this. I don't know about I can't also or Sean either. I don't think Sean and I both were just like, it is what it is.
How dare you? I loved Umbrella Corps. If Hunk, because there's those people in the fandom that tell me that Hunk is not Hunk because he's called the Commander. There's a chapter in Umbrella Corps called the Commander. Is he 37 Alpha then?
Clones of Hunk. It's all clones. You heard it here first.
Yeah, I mean, it could be 3-7 Alpha, but I think we all know it's Hunk.
Yeah. The same voice actor, isn't it, as well, that we were talking about?
Yeah.
So I think, actually, out of the wreckage of Raccoon City, that the kind of connections, harmonising of the storyline is actually quite a good one. And I just hope and pray that they do something interesting with it going forward? You feel that they're kind of acknowledging their vagueness of 7 and 8 and making, so putting them front and centre, and they're going to go, right, going forward. It's just a shame they did kill off Zeno. I think that's the pain. I think they could have kept him around for a bit longer.
I'll tell you what made me fell off my chair was the very direct references to RE6. I mean, obviously, we've talked about Sherry, but I did like the fact that Zeno talked about the fact that, the previous president tried to talk about this, Resident Evil 6, and then I totally fell off my fucking chair when I read the words, the family, in Grace's report. Like, I never thought that would ever come up ever again. I just thought it was one of those weird moments where Resident Evil tried to do the Patriots.
Well, it was. That's why it's crap. Even in Grace's report, though, it's mentioned in the same breath as Tricell HCF, as if the family are some kind of bioterrorists, which they're not. That's not what they're presented at all.
But I appreciated the fact that they just got mentioned, Nick. Like I said about the whole sort of Sherry thing, it's like beggars can't be choosers, and the fact that they even just took a moment to just mention it, I'll take what I get. In this series, it's so stingy about its like legacy references. I'll take what I can get, and I'll snatch it in my hands. And clutch it.
I'd also disagree, Nick, because I'd say in universe there are obviously a known quantity of what was the impact of all these giant outbreaks that all happened in 2012. Like, they are, as far as like the public's concerned. Like, I'm sure it got into the media eventually once all the truth came out, and so that organization, as they stand, the family, is known for what happened. Like, I'd say it pretty much in universe is completely true.
I don't know. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it was nice that they were mentioned. The way they were described, they were like the most powerful organisation on the planet. So for them to just appear for that one game and disappear. Playing Requiem, I thought Requiem could have been the Resident Evil 6 we wanted back in the day. If you swap out the family for the connections, and Zeno could have been Alex Wesker, you could have pretty much had the same game. But just to turn back to the connections, the only thing I think doesn't work is retroactively inserting them into the bombing of Raccoon City.
Oh, yes, yeah, big point, yeah.
Because there's so much complexity to that, and they've added to it over the years with first Ron Davis and then Derek Simmons voting on this committee to bomb it, and now they seemingly have gone back and said, well, no, it was actually the connections who've done it, and I'm struggling with that one because that doesn't really fit, in my opinion.
So what's the current position of pre-Requiem?
So pre-Requiem was that the government and Umbrella had been working together for a long time. They had this kind of uneasy relationship because the government couldn't be seen to be associated with Umbrella publicly if their illegal research ever came to light. And likewise, Umbrella knew they were safe because the government couldn't expose them without exposing themselves. And then when all the issues with Birkin started to happen, the government saw a way of getting free of Umbrella's shackles by saying, right, if we can acquire their best scientists, then we won't need to be affiliated with the company anymore. And that's obviously what kicked off the whole Raccoon City incident. And according to Karamura, who wrote the original Resident Evil 3, the bombing was ultimately done not to stop the spread of the virus, but to stop Umbrella getting out with the G-virus after the government had already recovered it. And it was further expanded on with Umbrella Chronicles when they said, well, actually the bombing was supposed to happen several days earlier, which means Jill would have been killed, but Spencer's political influence managed to delay it by several days. The edited footage of the UBCS, like rescuing civilians, which made the president say, right, well, I can't drop a bomb on the city when civilians are being rescued. And now Requiem's saying, well, the connections are now involved in that, and they've lobbied for the bomb to be dropped, and the government have said, well, we can't because we haven't got presidential authority, and for some reason the connections seem to have enough standing to overrule that, and they've just bypassed the presidential authority, secured Ark, and then they bombed it anyway.
My read on that was the fact that they may have had influence on the current standing president that literally got into his ear and got that presidential authority, because it's not confirmed or denied in that sense. Like, I hear that same description, and I'm like, these events could still line up if the idea is that they have a certain level of sway, but not enough that they couldn't get around like several day delay, and they were lobbying in that time to try and get it to happen, and eventually got the word of the president somehow i.e. maybe through proper channels, maybe through manipulation, who knows? And that was the swaying point. Yeah, it's still messy, don't get me wrong, but I don't see that it complicates anything more than it already was, personally.
Well,
but that's my take.
Perhaps, but I just think there's so much complexity to it anyway. I don't think they needed to add to it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Sure, there's an old BSAA camp here. Place is trashed. Looks like they left in a hurry.
What were the BSAA doing in Raccoon City?
Interesting.
What is it?
The computer's not locked. They were also headed to the center of Raccoon City.
Interesting, too. That reminds me. I dug a little deeper in the Pentagon's database, and I noticed something's missing.
What's that?
There's no record of anyone ordering the missile strike on Raccoon City.
Well, if not them, then who?
By the way, I found some evidence of the Pentagon putting pressure on the BSAA. It appears the North American branch has been moving independently.
Heard they had an internal dispute. Think it's related?
That's all I've got. There's been an increase in government surveillance. Looks like my fan base is growing.
Some things never change.
Let's quickly move on then to the BSAA, and in particular the ending, which I think is quite interesting with Hound Wolf Squad, because that was a bit of a plot point at the end of Village. We've long predicted, actually, haven't we, on the podcast, that the cliffhanger ending of Village wouldn't be addressed in any future game, just because the potential storyline or implications hinted at more of a CGI movie or something like that. It was always going to be very action orientated, and it would struggle to actually fit in with a game. And, you know, I'm not saying we're true about that, but we'll see. That hasn't been addressed. But Hound Wolf Squad do make a cameo appearance at the end, which enthralled us all.
So we're talking like a full, 5 years? So when was Village? Was Village
2021?
And Requiem is 2026. So 5 years, and nothing seems to have changed. So did Chris's big storming of BSAA Europe HQ mean nothing, or I don't know?
Did it even happen?
This is the problem inherent with like them having this decision to set each game in the time frame of when it's released, with the characters aging out and or jumping around the time frame, while also conveniently avoiding trying to say too much in case it pigeonholes them into a corner they get trapped in again, which is... Yeah, this is where I kind of, like, as GT was mentioning earlier, like, it kind of does need a bit more of an overall narrative plan going ahead. But that's also risky because they've, as Capcom continues to do from a development cycle, they kind of want to be reactionary on the pros and cons of each release. You know, there are elements that will be, you know, they'll make decisions internally. Obviously, things like the open world element of this game that eventually be pushed down. You know, the same thing will apply. They'll end up going, well, which bits of these stories resonated with people, which didn't, what should we follow up on? Even the gameplay style, we've talked about this as well, like this decision to kind of do the both gameplay styles because they had been making games in either one is the same reaction. And so it's kind of frustrating. I wish they would actually commit to some bigger arcs. And it's my same concern with a lot of the MCU problem. Fun enough, Sean, the same thing. When you have to commit to making a certain level of arcs, you can only go so far. And if you do it well, you end up with a nice series of movies. You do it badly, you end up with a Disney Plus series. You know.
Yeah. To be clear as well, I just want to state this before you guys have your own opinion on it. But I know people have used a camera hack on the ending and have looked into the helmets of the BSAA soldiers and have seen they are the zombie bioweapon versions. I don't personally see that as canon. I think that is more of an asset reuse from Village.
Yeah, it will be. It's just a normal thing. Capcom does this all the time. I mean, the off-camera thing as well, people point out there's a woman being interviewed in the background. It's literally the same character model as the woman who is the first one infected on the street in the cutscene.
Isn't the guy who gives Grace the coffee not Redfield or something?
It looks like
it does look like him. All these models have a budgetary and time constraint thing to them, and, you know, if you can reuse or adapt assets. I mean, this goes back. How many people comment on Leon Zombie in the back of the car and the OG RE2 CG scene because Imagica, the company, was like in a hurry to get those done and was just like, okay. And they didn't even bother to change the hairstyle. If they just changed the hairstyle, it probably wouldn't have been so obvious. Like this is a constant in all development, you shortcuts, it costs time and money.
Claire Zombie isn't there in the same outfit as Billy Zombie. I think there's also, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's Mr. X walking at the beginning of Ren.
I think that's an intentional, like he's in that cutscene, bumps into it. It's an intentional nod of like a guy in a trench coat and a hat as a nod, but he does walk back past you after you see him in the cutscene. He gets reused again, and even in the gameplay throughout all the entire franchise, the zombie models get reused, and there's so many duplicates of things, and that's just a game thing. Like I think people need to separate that from reading into what it actually means, just simply on a budgetary, finite development concept.
The question is, therefore, is the BSAA now rotten? Which is an idea that was mentioned in the Baker report as well, which again tied into our theory that it had been corrupted by Blue Umbrella, which made sense, who didn't have the best intentions. What now of the BSAA?
Well, I think there's been a slight retcon there because they're clearly not a ruined organisation. They're still functioning 5 years later. I think the village cliffhanger has been addressed to a certain extent. They give a typically vague answer when Sherry says the Pentagon's been putting pressure on the BSAA and the North American branch has started acting independently. I mean, it could be another case of, whilst Village ended on an obvious cliffhanger, maybe we're making more of a deal about it than it actually is. Chris could have gone to BSAA Europe headquarters and they might legitimately not have known anything about this supposed incursion into Miranda's village. If the connections have got a role in the BSAA, corrupting them. And files state as well that the BSAA have made legitimate attempts to destroy Ark, so they're clearly not institutionally corrupt.
I mean, they're on the ground there in Raccoon, the ones getting their kids shot off
and
intentionally, and they've set up all this gear everywhere, to infiltrate the city and monitor what's going on and radio it back.
And the satellite images of them looking for Ark is dated 2023. So I think after that failed incursion when Zeno shot them all, I think then the government and the connections have stepped in and said, right, we need to take control over the North American BSAA and stop them coming again and potentially exposing Ark. But the only problem with that theory is, why do the North American branch turn up in the ending? And then the connections have to send in another squad to then shoot them all. On the other side of the coin, you could say, well, maybe the North American branch has started acting independently because the rest of the BSAA is corrupt, and it's maybe because of Chris's influence that they have started acting independently, and that's why they are trying to destroy Ark.
The irony is too, there's a nice little tidy together with the fact that the connections getting the hooks into the organisation worldwide prior is a nice distraction to make sure that they don't get into Ark. Like, it actually is a nice little, could tie together really well. Or any other things that the connections are doing as well, that it could be, in the same realm, that it allows them to have a certain level of, much like they did with this obviously now added government control. Yeah, it could be quite interesting in that way, but they haven't haven't fully gone down that path, and it's left relatively vague and unexplained.
But the Hound Wolf Squad are clearly working with the North American BSAA in the ending. So
yes, and Chris is part of that, so yeah, it makes sense.
Exactly.
There was no connection between Grace and Emily.
Do you know how much time and money I wasted on this?
Don't you see the genius? With Elpus, all virus-based weapons are useless. The world order would be thrown into chaos.
We wanted a weapon.
Instead, Spencer gave us anarchy. I will carry his torch and bring his vision to life.
You and Spencer were a means to an end.
Yet he outwitted you all.
Spencer defied us and paid the price with his life. He was nothing.
You are nothing but an imitation.
It's over, Victor. The Connections is done with you.
A couple of other loose points that I know have cropped up. Something I still raised regarding Raccoon City, why it's still standing in the way it is, compared to even how Raccoon City is shown in its destruction in Resident Evil 3. How does one navigate that problem.
That's just a retcon. It's literally a retcon.
We're just going to go retcon.
There's no other way around it. The implication in that OG version was that it was decimated. They do a T2 nuclear style destruction, buildings being obliterated, and then when they remade that in 3, they don't show that in detail so that they could potentially leave this as an open choice. It's a retcon. There's no other way around it.
I mean, even if you take the Outbreak footage, like the Outbreak, the multi-missile version shows like the overpass, the freeway being completely obliterated and collapsing and stuff like that, and it's fully intact basically in Requiem.
Just a few potholes.
This goes back to my moaning and when we were doing the Umbrella Corps episode about like the fact that it was the Antarctic facility was so still intact, considering you see it literally explosion, giant detonation in the background in Code Veronica that clearly tells you that the whole thing was obliterated. But it apparently in the universe now still exists. They changed the bomb too. This is the other part I guess we should talk about, is that inherently the one that supposedly was used for the OG one is very different than the one that is now inherently used in canon, I guess, for how it explains why buildings are still around and there are still undead creatures and virus creatures and all sorts. The irony is that the idea of some of these things are trying to tidy it up so it's a little bit easier to explain to new people. That's the irony of it, isn't it? It's like we're taking this as so messy when realistically this is them trying to tidy things up a bit more.
At the end of the day, we're sat here for, I'm looking at the record time and it's over
almost
4
4
hours.
Yeah.
Over 4 hours. And, we're discussing, lore implications of an insert into a modern game, which is literally like impact font HCF on an asset that we've seen in the game. And I think, was it Rob, you mentioned this in the last episode, we've seen this palette of boxes across the entire game, but yet for one palette in the Ark facility right at the end, they just put an impact font HCF. And the fandom goes fucking crazy and goes, oh my god, isn't it so clever?
Yeah. Tri-cell barrel, HCF font, whoa, lost my shit. And I'm like, but see, this is the thing. What does that mean to, we've got to think about the era, and this is, again, us being old fuddy-duddies, but it's also the fact that, a bunch of people, they don't know what HCF is, that have only played these remakes, probably, and the more modern games are going to be like HCF, and the only other reference to it for them might be Resident Evil 7. So that was such a backwards thing to think about as well. Tri-cell only if they've played 5, but if they don't get it, they'll just be like, oh, other companies that have something to do with Ark. Okay, cool, whatever.
I think Requiem's quite useful, though, in terms of harmonizing a lot of it, because I think if you look back on the entire kind of bioterrorism angle, so much of it is kind of told off screen, and Requiem's just as guilty of it. It's like, oh, we've been using this as a base for all our bioterrorism activities, and it's like, it'll be nice to see some of this, what you constantly refer to. You never do. The only time we've actually had it is either in Damnation of an actual bioterrorism war, and then, ironically, 6 with Adonia, which I found to be the most exciting part of Resident Evil 6, and the most accurate of what the whole point of why all these companies want all this bioterrorism, so they can actually put it on the battlefield and make money. I think this is 6's best element.
Neptune just called RE6 a masterpiece.
There's a whole fallacy with this whole bioweapon thing, which ironically the thing that made me realize this was actually the 5th of the films that Anderson did. You keep selling bioweapons to all these different markets. So the idea was, as an organization, that you would be essentially cost agnostic. You would go with whoever's the highest bidder, right? And then it's like weapons of mass destruction. What happens when everyone has the bioweapons? How do you continue as a company and make profits when you're essentially creating stuff that's going to potentially end the world? And it kind of becomes a weird fallacy that you can't do that. It becomes an impossible task. And that's the one side of it I've never liked, ironically, is the opposite end of that, is that sales side of it. It's okay to come across things and accidentally create them. That's why I've given it a bit of a pass, because it was always built in the idea of creating these viruses with other creatives' intents above it. But the number of times we all joked, and other people have joked about, it wouldn't have been surprising if instead of Ark, all of a sudden we found like Birkin had taken over the entire underground of the city and was still alive, growing for 28 years because he didn't actually die. That would be just as plausible at this point, because reasons. But then what do you do with a giant city-sized monster?
Exactly, yeah. I think we are coming towards the end now. I think we've had a very good discussion. Unless anyone has any other particular points that we have forgotten that need further elaboration.
Fuck you, Paul W.S. Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
Curious to see what the connections were recovering in the post-credit sequence. It might be Zeno's remains, or I honestly don't know.
So concluding thoughts then from everyone, perhaps some theories, DLC, and ultimately whether you feel Requiem is a good thing or bad thing for the overall lore. Rob, let's start with you.
I have no idea where they're going with the story DLC. I'll start with that, because at this point it's such an open book. It could be a case of picking up exactly what that post-credit scene is. Is it more to expand one of the characters? Is it going to, as we were talking about before, is it going to explain more about Grace? There doesn't seem to be an obvious narrative connection to get her to continue. That would have to be well after the events of the game. Is there going to be another returning character? Who fucking knows? I'm happy to take anything, and if it adds more narrative, I'm keen. And I really don't have any predictions, honestly, because it could be anything at this point. From a narrative perspective of the game, it's a mixed bag, and I don't mean that in a negative form. It's just a mixed bag. There is lots of stuff I like about the fact they've tidied things up, and things that have been left vague have been explained. But I also get very frustrated when they leave stuff very much unanswered because they don't want to pigeonhole themselves. They're in this weird place of like tidy up and narratively constrict, but also don't want to pigeonhole themselves too much. And I wish they were willing to take some risks on that just to make it narratively interesting, or else it stagnates, because otherwise we don't get any answers again, and then we're back to square one. Because before Requiem I was bemoaning the fact that I was looking at all the loose threads, and there are still several major loose threads in the franchise that still haven't been resolved and may never get resolved. Who knows? But it's a good step as far as I'm concerned. Where I'm going with this is a good step as far as I'm concerned, and I think more of this, more thought process put into connecting things up and having these things tidied up and actually driving a narrative forwards. I think there's been an excuse, and we've also said this before, about the remakes having this ability to not put narrative forward because we were just repeating and revisiting the past a lot. And obviously, while that's true, it belies the idea that I've said this before, you can't keep remaking things forever because you run out of remakes. But it's not just that. It's also that those fans of those remakes are going to want to know what also happens next. So not only a generation of ourselves that have come from older games that want to know what's happening and waiting for new games to come out, these people that are playing the remakes are still also going to be wanting to see the story go forward from here. And people who join the games now and go and play through all these games want the story to continue. So you have to keep pushing these narratives forward, and you have to keep making them interesting and opening them up. So yeah, I guess the only thing I really want to see is that they explain Oswald Spencer's motivations more and what Grace applies to that if I was to follow up an actual direct story on Requiem, because I think that answer will be quite interesting, because I would rather that be actually properly resolved rather than left vague. There's no reason for them to. Like, in the narrative of the game itself is a mystery, yes, but I think now it's pretty easy to say, hey, look, just tell the truth of what Spencer was actually doing, because there's no reason not to. It's interesting. It's topical and relevant to the actual narrative of Requiem, and it would be a good setting off point for maybe moving to the next step of it. And otherwise, some explanation more about where the connections is going and who Zeno was and stuff I would like to see, but whether or not that happens, I don't know. That's my take.
Thanks, Rob. George, what would you like to see in any DLC? And do you think it enhances the game?
I'm concerned that Elpis has kind of made my aspirations redundant, in that I would like to have seen the personal tragedies of the other characters that we were hoping for but didn't see. But then it's kind of it's a cure-all. So I don't kind of really see how that can be extended. It's quite a self-contained story in a sense. So I'm trying to work out where we can get further DLC. I mean, I really have loved and been fascinated by the Grace character, just the emotion that she's gone through, the nuances that you see in the emotions through that whole full body performance. I really enjoyed. And so I was kind of intrigued in learning more about her childhood, and, but I don't know where they really can go with that. Whether we're going to see more kind of Neo's story. Because I really enjoyed the idea that he perhaps wasn't aware that he was a copy, and perhaps he was the original. So if we're going to see some of his story, perhaps.
Stars?
I mean, I'd love to see some Sherry DLC. I genuinely don't know where they're going to go with her with regards to the end of the game. I'd previously theorised that they could show her before the events of the game. And like, on a case with her and Leon, she discovers that, she and he have some sort of issue going on with some bruising and things like that, and that leads to where they are in Requiem. I don't know. So I'm just happy that we've got a new story, because this is where I thrive. I don't think people quite understand. Like, I know everybody rolls their eyes when I talk about remakes and stuff, but like, this is where I'm at my happiest. When we're talking about new titles, we spent 4 hours, ladies and gentlemen, talking about theories and plot threads and things like that, and I know not all of it. I know not all of it is satisfying. I know the Zeno thing is a bit weird to a lot of people, and the Spencer redemption arc, whichever way you want to support or deny it or anything like that, it has various mileage with you and stuff, but at least it's something to chew on. At least it's something to talk about. And as long as the series does this, as long as any DLC just further adds to more questions, I don't even necessarily know if I want the answers, because I think we're so used to not getting answers. We're just so used to more questions that we can fill out our mythologies and timelines with and carry on our Discord chats and everything like that. I'm game with whatever DLC they've got in mind, but if it's Sherry, I'm totally on board, because there's some untapped potential there, and I really, really want to see what they've got in store for that character. So the only thing that I've got left that I want to ask you all is the Wesker project, the Wesker children. Was Wesker given the mutated T-virus?
I think it's a possibility, yeah, or some derivative of it, because the children in the orphanage are just way too similar, with the instant healing powers and the red eyes, and even when Leon hacks at Zeno's arm, it just heals instantly, just like the kids do.
That's the next question then, is like, where have those kids gone?
Well, I presume
28 years later, were they disposed of? Or how do you dispose of something that's immortal, or what?
I don't know, but yeah, I would say the implication is they've all been killed.
Especially considering by the time you have the Resident Evil 2 remake, the orphanage has been repurposed to being used for Burke and stuff. So what happened in the few years between the early 90s and then? So
right. From my point of view, I'd slightly agree with George. I think the game is written in such a way that a lot of the plot points are actually kind of sorted out. If they said that it was never going to be any story DLC to this, you wouldn't go, oh no, we're missing out on something. So much of it, I think, is kind of dealt with. I mean, you could say it would be nice to have a little bit of Alyssa DLC, perhaps. My first thought was whether we're going to get Chris DLC, because I found it quite interesting that they said Chris is not here. Whereas, they keep going on about that. It's almost like, oh, Chris is on another mission. And I thought, is that the clue for DLC? I don't know.
The Poochie problem.
The Poochie problem, yeah, exactly, yeah. That was my only thing. I mean, obviously it's good that we're going to get story DLC. I mean, if we go back to Village, who would have possibly thought that the Village DLC would have been anything like it was, with, the realms of consciousness and all that bollocks? So it could go it could go in any direction. I'd like to see a bit of Sherry. I'd like to see Alyssa. I wouldn't even mind Zeno. Yeah, as George says again, I wouldn't even mind seeing a bit of Zeno. It might be quite a bit of fun if you're going around, basically Wesker mode, going around Raccoon City. I don't know. I'm very open to what they want to do. Does it harm the lore? I don't like what they've done. I can't say I'm a big fan of the storyline. I like talking about it, and I've thoroughly enjoyed our podcast discussion, because through these discussions it helps me kind of come to terms with a lot of the decisions that I wouldn't necessarily have agreed with. I liked Elpus. I like the idea of Elpus, and I like the fact that the connections are now more embedded within the storyline. Good plot points there. I'm just ashamed that we're probably not going to get any follow-up to this for quite some time, which I think is probably going to be a bit of a shame. And then by which time we could be 5 years down the line and Resident Evil 10, and we've got a completely different outlook on what's going to go on with the series. So, we'll see. I'm looking forward to the DLC just to see what they do with it. John, did you want to wrap up your views on possible DLC and lore implications?
Yeah, the story, I enjoy a lot of it, but there are certain aspects I don't like. I think it's hard to judge overall without the DLC. I think wherever they go with it, they can wrap up some things, like give us a little bit of an explanation for Zeno, because as it stands right now, there's absolutely no point in him being a Wesker imitation. It doesn't aid the story in any way, so I'm hoping they do something with that. I know it sounds boring, but I really want to see Chris again, and I want to see him with Jill. I think the fact he wasn't with Hound Wolf Squad at the ending is significant. Why wouldn't he be there? So I think it's a good opportunity to show Chris and Jill back together, because obviously we don't know why, what's Jill been doing for the last 10 years? Why isn't she part of the Hound Wolf Squad, and it'll be a good opportunity to maybe address a bit more of that village cliffhanger with the BSAA, clarify what's going on with them, and maybe give us a few references as to what's happened with Claire and whether she was infected as well. Because the ending cliffhanger clearly hints that when it says that, we need to get this out before the wolves come back or whatever, it's clearly showing that the connections view Hound Wolf Squad as a threat. So it wouldn't surprise me if we maybe see Chris storming some connections facility with Jill and Hound Wolf Squad. That's the direction I would like to see, but to be honest, it's anyone's guess at the moment.
Okay, well, thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, actually. That does finish our in-depth lore look at, if you like, of Resident Evil Requiem. Plenty more to come, no doubt, as the DLC will drop, and we'll reevaluate everything as and when Capcom release some more material. On that note, we do have time for Neptune's Biohazard quiz.
The ultimate test of Resident Evil knowledge returns. 100 podcasts later.
Jesus Christ. That's a fucking question, is that?
I'm getting a big fat 0 this week.
Yeah, I'm not going to get any of these.
I'm not going to say anything because I know if I do, you will just change the answer or something. Like, you don't even know what the answers are.
Can I just ask, have you had all of these questions independently verified?
And still things don't quite go to plan.
You only have to probably get it right.
Welcome to Neptune's Biohazard quiz. Batman. Star Tyrants. George Trevor. Robbie McGregor. Mr. Spencer. Neptune's Biohazard quiz.
Welcome. We've got 5 quick Requiem questions, so clear your desktops. You can open up Notepad, see how well everyone does now. So question number 1, what is the name of the police officer that Grace meets in Renwood? What is his name? Question number 2, sticking with Renwood, in what room did Grace and Alyssa stay at in the Renwood Hotel? What room number did they stay at? Question number 3 comes in from our patron Aaron Z, and it's an odd one out round. A welcome return to the odd one out round. So which is the odd one out here? Freya, Leon, Matilda, Albert. I'll repeat those names again. Freya, Leon, Matilda, Albert. Question number 4 is a timeline question from Jordan Osiris. On what date did Spencer visit the orphanage, as shown in the Ark photo? And finally, question number 5. Other than finding a missing library book, can you name any other to-do on Barry's list? So what other things was on Barry's to-do list? And a few things. So other than finding the missing library book, which I know John was very excited about. That was his Requiem highlight.
Massively.
They're the 5 questions. Join us after this and we'll run through those answers.
The government has confirmed the existence of an actively trading bioweapons lab located here in the ruins of Raccoon City. The origin point for the worldwide spread of bioorganic weapons. This illegal facility appears to have been in operation for decades.
Sources say that the extension of the lockdown and the recent series of mysterious deaths may be related to tragic events in Raccoon City 28 years ago.
Evidence seized in Raccoon City has led the Justice Department to reopen its investigation into Oswald Spencer and the long-defunct Umbrella Corporation. Some believe the government deliberately drove Umbrella into bankruptcy.
The late Alyssa Ashcroft is credited with cracking the Oswald Spencer story. Conspiracy theorists are already claiming that she was killed in a cover-up, and that the organization responsible is secretly controlling our government.
Tonight, In a speech from the Oval Office, the president is expected to reject allegations of any government involvement since the Raccoon City incident.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Here we go. 5 Requiem questions. We'll get the answers. How well has everyone done? So, question number 1 was, what was the name of the police officer Grace meets in Wrenwood? Romby, we'll start with you.
I couldn't remember. I honestly couldn't remember this at all.
Start, Siren.
Norman Cole.
Norman Cole. George Trevor?
I knew it was Norman. I had no idea of the surname. I've got Norman.
Got Norman. Batman?
Norman Cole.
Is Norman Cole. Points to Batman and Star Starrett, half a point to GT. Well done.
Where do you get the surname? Because I thought I got Norman because I'm sure it comes out in the cutscene. Where do you get his surname? Is it in a file?
From the figurines you can unlock.
Oh, okay.
And also in the credits.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Question 2. What room number did Grace and Alyssa stay at the Wrenwood Hotel, George?
204.
204. Romby?
I think it was 204, but I wasn't 100%.
That's Darren?
202 I had written down.
202.
I'm now feeling I'm wrong.
Batman?
204.
Ah! It is 204. Yes. Question number 3 was the odd one out round. So out of these 4 names, which is the odd one out, we had Freya, Leon, Matilda, and Albert. Batman, we'll start with you. Which is the odd one out?
Is this firearm related? Because Matilda and Albert are both guns. Leon obviously isn't a gun, and Freya, I must admit, is stumping me. Yeah. My mind's gone blank with that one, but I'm gonna guess that Freya is some sort of firearm, and Leon is the odd one out because he's the only one who's not a gun.
Okay, Star Starrett?
It is Leon, because Freya is Grace's unlockable automatic pistol or whatever in Requiem. And Matilda and Albert are obviously firearms in other games. Leon.
Romby?
That was my exact same answer, that it's Leon because it's the only one that's not the name of a gun. Leon does not have a gun named Leon, and no one else has a gun named Leon as far as I'm aware, but all the others are weapon names.
George Trevor?
Yeah, I was on the right track, but then my knowledge let me down because I put down Matilda because I thought that was the only one that I thought was a gun. I didn't realise there was a gun called Albert. So, yeah, no, wrong. I had Matilda because I thought that was the only one that was a gun.
Points to Batman, Stars, and Romby. It is, yes. Leon is the odd one out. Freya, well, I couldn't have put it better. Stars, you're spot on. Freya is Grace's unlockable weapon. Matilda is the Matilda gun.
Freya's needle.
Needle, that's the one, Freya's needle. And Albert is the gun from Resident Evil 7 we used to take down Evelyn.
Oh, shit, I should have known that. Fuck.
Isn't it nice to have an odd one out round that's normal?
Yeah, that's not a random car manufacturer or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's what happens. You get good suggestions from our patrons. They just, decent odd one out ones. Anyway, question 4 was a timeline question from Jordan Osiris. On what date did Spencer visit the orphanage as per the Ark photo? This is quite tricky, so I'll see how well everyone's done to distribute points accordingly. Romby, start with you for this one.
April 15th, 1987.
Okay. Stars down.
Wow.
I had no idea. I just wrote it in 1986 down.
George?
No, I had absolutely no idea.
Batman?
I thought it was 23rd of May, 1987.
15th of April, 1987. Absolutely spot on from Romby.
It's such a creepy photo, and I remember reading the date and memorizing it in case you asked this exact question.
That's the thing. I've done shit like this before.
Yeah,
I have read a file and thought, Nick's going to ask me that fucking question.
Yeah.
I'm going to memorise that bastard's name.
I'm glad he asked it this soon. If he'd asked it in like a year from now, I would be like, April something? 80... But the fact that it's like fresh in my mind from a couple of weeks
ago.
This
is exactly the reason why I memorised NTCO 394. That fucking
card in Code
ID card from Code Veronica.
Yeah.
I just knew it was going to come up one day, and it never did.
I was shocked by that image when you came across it in the game. I was just like, "Oh, that's so cool! Like, how creepy is that?" Like, and then you have that file as well in the room where the person's all excited about as I said, I think I referenced last time.
When the came up, Rob, did you just punch the air?
Yeah, quietly. Yeah. I was like, yes.
Well done there, Rob. Absolutely fantastic. Well done. And finally, question number 5 was, other than finding a missing library book, can you name any other of the to-dos on Barry's list from the file? Let's start with Romby.
Please start with me again.
Yeah, I am. Well, I'm going off your high.
One of them is join Jill at the shooting range, I think.
Okay. Batman?
Take the kids to soccer practice.
Okay, Stars Darren?
I had shooting with Jill.
George Trevor?
I had, I thought it was pick up kids from school, and I think in brackets it had something like don't forget or don't be late, and also to meet Jill at the firing range.
Points all round. Well done. Yes, you could have meet Jill at the shooting range, pick up the girls from football, and as you said, George, don't be late. Training plan for the new recruit.
I was trying to remember that one, but I didn't know how to word it.
What's the other one, who I assume means Rebecca?
I thought it meant Leon.
No, I think it means Rebecca, because
okay.
He references the library book, doesn't he? And he says, I think the captain had it out last.
Oh, okay.
I was going to ask you if everyone else was hoping for kind of like a check Natalia's room. There's been strange noises coming from there lately, or something like that. But then that doesn't really work with the time.
No, it doesn't.
Timeline, no.
Let's have a look at the very high scoring round. Wow. So in last place, but with a very respectable 50%, 2.5, it's GT.
Oh, that would have won on some weeks.
It would that would be a winning score of many. In second place is Stars Tyrant with 3 out of 5.
Hello.
But joint winners this time, both with 4 out of 5. It's the Batman and Romby. Well done, gents. Very
funny,
good.
I could have remembered the police officer's name at all.
It had a full house.
You're the new timeline king, Rob.
Just this week, and ask me in 2 more weeks, you'll be like, what's that date again? April 86?
That does finish Neptune's Biohazard quiz. Join us next time when we'll have some more questions. We are now entering the end game of the podcast. We hope everyone has enjoyed our deep lore dive into Requiem. Coming up next, we are not quite yet done with Resident Evil 9. Oh no, and it's your turn at home. So it is our very excitable community call-in podcast where we ask you to send in your 2-minute MP3s. And we will play as many as we can. Requiem's such a big game. There's multiple elements we probably still have yet to discuss. So if there's anything you feel we've missed over these past 2 podcasts and you want us to cover again, then send us a 2-minute call-in to our email address, which is team@residentevilpodcast.com. As I said, preferably an MP3. Makes my life a little bit easier for editing. Patrons get priority for these things. But we will do our best to play as many as we can. And that will be our next podcast. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening. We hope everyone has enjoyed it. It's goodbye from me, Neptune.
Goodbye from me, Batman.
Goodbye from me, Stars Tyrant.
Goodbye from me, George Trevor.
And goodbye from me, main character syndrome inflicted Robbie.